Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you today to our symposium, JTS and the Jerusalem Talmud. Today's event was made possible by the generous assistance of our home institution, the Jewish Theological Seminary. My thanks to Chancellor Shuli Schwartz, Provost Jeff Kress, and Faculty Secretary Michelle Mering. Our event is co-sponsored by two Israeli institutions. We thank and welcome Professor Aviad HaKohen of the Academic Center for Law and Science and Professor Menachem Katz of the Talmud Yerushalmi HaDigitali. I am especially pleased that at this very challenging time for the State of Israel, we at the seminary can partner with Israeli institutions and offer substantive content revolving specifically around Torat Eretz Yisrael. There are many distinguished guests in the audience this afternoon. With your permission, I will single out just one. We are honored to have with us today David Gould, Professor Louis and Mrs. Adele Ginsburg's grandson. Chancellor Schwartz sends her regrets for not being here at the beginning of our program, especially because of her close and long relationship with the Ginsburg-Gould family. We will have the honor and pleasure of hearing from her at the end of the symposium at 6:15. The Talmud Yerushalmi, its text and context, have baffled scholars since the beginning of Wissenschaft des Judentums in the 19th century, and proved to be intriguing and frustrating to the medievals, the Rishonim, centuries before. It is no exaggeration to say that JTS has been at the center and the forefront of unraveling the riddles of Talmuda Divnei Ma'arava from its earliest beginnings. Indeed, one of Solomon Schechter's first publications was of Yerushalmi fragments from the Cairo Geniza. As we will hear more about today, Louis Ginsburg and Saul Lieberman both wrote path-breaking and lasting contributions to the study of the Yerushalmi. Even as recently as just this year, JTS Publications in Israel republished Ginsburg's commentary to Brachot with Lieberman's notes, bringing the insights of both scholars in sequence, page after page, to the reading public. As our symposium will make clear, however, JTS's role in the study of the Jerusalem Talmud was not just in the past. It is in the present and will be in the future. With JTS's recent publication of Moshe Assis's Otzar Leshonot Yerushalmiim, a definitive lexicon of the Yerushalmi's language and terminology, with Richard Kalman's continued comparative studies of the Bavli and Yerushalmi, and Marjorie Lehman's Digital Humanities Project, tracing, among other works, the movement of copies of the Yerushalmi around the globe, and with the forthcoming edition of Ginsburg's commentary to Psachim, edited by Eliezer Diamond, the study and the scholarship of the Yerushalmi remain front and center at JTS. I am thrilled to report that with the ongoing work of our presenters, colleagues, and students, the future of Yerushalmi studies looks very promising. JTS and the Jerusalem Talmud, our symposium today will take us through the history of the contributions of the past, the insights of the present, and the potential for the future. It is fitting that our first presentation today will be by Professor Shama Friedman, JTS's first PhD in Talmud, Lieberman's primary student, a towering scholar of rabbinic literature, and Israel Prize laureate, and my revered teacher. I invite you now to direct your attention to the screen where Professor Friedman will address us in a pre-recorded message.
I want to congratulate Professor Jonathan Milgram for his insight and ingenuity in organizing this impressive symposium on JTS and the Jerusalem Talmud. Indeed, the seminary has housed two of the founding fathers of modern Yerushalmi scholarship, Louis Ginsburg, author of Sridei Yerushalmi and Yerushalmi Commentary, and Saul Lieberman, author of Yerushalmi Kipshuto and Ala Yerushalmi. Jonathan asked me to say a few words about Mori Rabbi Professor Saul Lieberman. Anyone attempting to understand and evaluate the monumental works of Saul Lieberman will at once realize that Lieberman attained a special status in Jewish intellectual history. His extensive achievements, the meticulously edited commentaries on rabbinic literature, along with his originality of approach in method and content, have all earned him a place among the select few, the towering Gaonim of our intellectual history, Torah and greatness intertwined. His oeuvre, revealing vast scope of knowledge, bold innovations, and sophisticated interpretive methods, all tower above the lengthy area that preceded him, presenting a blend of traditional learning and scholarly methodology for arriving at the truth. Most notably, Lieberman put into practice the uppermost aspirations of Talmud scholars since the very inception of Wissenschaft des Judentums, with profundity, originality, and ways undreamt of by the discipline's founding fathers. The combined qualities of the assiduous yeshiva student and modern scholar came together so perfectly in Lieberman due to his own talents and capabilities in both domains. Perhaps his success can be attributed to his perception of academic research, not as a foreign body within traditional learning, but rather as its natural continuation and perfection. Lieberman embodied the heritage of the most illustrious Torah scholars in Eastern Europe, not only by birthright, but also in his intellectual origins. He was raised in the famous tradition attributed to the Vilna Gaon, known for striving for the straightforward text meaning by in-depth and painstaking analysis. Never relinquishing this method, Lieberman honed it and perfected it so that it would pass any academic test, while at the same time introducing sophisticated improvements to the critical study so that it would pass any test of traditional learning, the best of both worlds. It was Lieberman who set the study of rabbinic literature squarely at the center of Jewish studies. In illuminating matters of halakha, he also contributed generously to adjacent fields of research: Hebrew language, realia, history, Jewish philosophy, textual analysis, and antiquity and the Jews. These fields of research have profited from his scholarship for nearly a century. Lieberman's innovations reveal an alarming scope of knowledge, power of recall, uncompromising analysis, and the amazing ability to make connections which he applied ceaselessly. In his own view, however, the main purpose was not chidushim, but steadfast study of the classic source texts. He was constantly revisiting the text again and again. For their part, they never failed to yield a prodigious harvest for all his labors. Lieberman considered his commentaries on continuous text his primary activity, with the rest coming second. Those minor writings, as he termed them, were in his view side tracks and delays on the main road, enjoyable and stimulating though they may be. That main road is none other than commentary on the major sources of rabbinic literature with painstaking production of critical editions, first and foremost of the Tosefta and the Yerushalmi. I had the privilege of occasionally serving as Professor Lieberman's Balagula, as he used to call me, especially when he traveled from Israel to Chutz La'aretz. That means from Jerusalem to New York. And I drive him from his home on Ben Maimon Street to the airport. Lieberman preferred night flights, so he'd leave Jerusalem at about 10 p.m. when traffic was light, at least then in those days, both in the city and on the highways. Lieberman would always converse with me during the first few minutes as we drove through Jerusalem, but as soon as we reached the highway, he fell silent. I never knew whether in order to study or to rest or perhaps to meditate. Once I drove him on that route. This is what happened. As we approached the airport, I turned off the highway. Professor Lieberman spoke aloud, asking me, "What's the matter?" "We've arrived," I replied. "Impossible," he declared. "We haven't arrived yet." I explained. We hadn't actually arrived at the airport, but we just turned off the highway. He persisted. "It's not time to turn off the highway yet." Then he followed this up with a categorical statement. "You were driving faster than usual." Now I knew with certainty that I was in fact driving faster than usual on that particular ride. Overawed as I was by Lieberman, I always drove much slower than usual, while on that particular occasion I had mustered the courage to purposely accelerate a little closer to the normal speed. It turned out that even while traveling, Professor Lieberman maintained his custom of silently reciting Mishnah Seder Tohorot. Through this regular repetition, he had acquired clear signposts for measuring the distance of his various trips. He knew precisely which Mishnah he'd come to at every time at the end of this specific trip. So, in that respect, indeed, we had not yet arrived yet. Like the Mishnah, Professor Lieberman memorized the Yerushalmi verbatim, both orally and visually, and who knows how many other works. Despite the strictness of his demands upon himself and others, Lieberman was a warm social person and had a captivating personality. Everything I learned from Lieberman and from his writings instilled in me an ever-growing appreciation of the Torah's greatness. Chaval al da'avdin v'la mishtachin.
I now thank you very much. I'm very pleased to start the first session, The Legacy of Louis Ginsburg, Fragments of the Palestinian Talmud and the JTS Library Collection. I invite up Professor Marjorie Lehman, Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at the seminary, and Area Chair for Rabbinic Literatures and Cultures, Professor Lehman.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, and many thanks to my colleague, Jonathan Milgram, for all of this hard work in organizing this. So I'm moderating, and each presenter will be given 25 minutes, and I will let you know when you have 7 minutes left on the clock so that you can decide whether or not you want to take that time for discussion or whether you want to just keep going. So that's up to you. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Professor Eliezer Diamond, Rabbi Judah Nadich, Professor Emeritus of Talmud and Rabbinics here at JTS, who will be speaking about Ginsburg as Yerushalmi commentator, methods and goals.
Tzorayim Tovim. Wonderful to see you all. With the recent appearance of a new annotated edition of Professor Louis Ginsburg's commentary on Yerushalmi Brachot, including much-needed source and topical indices, and my forthcoming edited and annotated edition of his commentary on Yerushalmi Pesachim, chapters 1 through 4 and part of chapter 5, as well as the discovery of other of his Yerushalmi commentaries among his papers, we have an opportunity to reassess Professor Ginsburg's contributions to Yerushalmi scholarship. At times I will refer to Professor Ginsburg as Ralag, the acronym for Rav Levi Ginsburg. This is how Rosh Lieberman refers to him in many places, particularly in Tosefta Kipshuta. I decided not to speak broadly about his methods, which he himself delineates in his Mavot to his Brachot commentary. You'll also see Shmuel Glick's illuminating introduction to the new edition of the Perushim V'Chidushim Yerushalmi. Rather, Based on the Yerushalmi commentaries written by Ralag that were found in his papers some years ago, I will trace the arc of his changing approach to writing a Yerushalmi commentary, which I will argue passes through 3 stages. In other words, we can now understand in concrete terms Ralag's statement in his Akdama to the Perushim v'Chidushim Yerushalmi, henceforth Perushim v'Chidushim, with which he explains why he is publishing his commentary on Brachot and not the earlier commentaries. This is source Dalet if you've received the handout. If not, it's still source Dalet. It says, B'midah she'adam mashkiya et atzmo, be'iza mikzoa shehu, hashkafato v'havanato bo holchot v'godlot. V'av hashkafati al Talmud halcha v'gadla bashanim shetipalti bo. Now, Ralag states in 3 places that he wrote a commentary on the Kta'im appearing in the Sridei HaYerushalmi. He first states this in his Hakdama to that volume, which was published in 1909, and he notes that in a number of instances he refers to this Perush in his notes in the Sridei HaYerushalmi volume. This is source Beit, Varishanai Tamach Shavti Ladpis Im Guf Ktav Yad Gama Perushim Ve'arot Sheli אבל מפני שרבים אימה הוכרחתי לסדרם בספר מיוחד, ורצות השם יצאו לאור בזמן לא רחוק. בכל מקום שנמצא בחלק זה, עיין פירושים והערים, כוונתי לחלק השני, and then he also promises a mavo, which of course he finally publishes at the beginning of the Perushim v'Chidushim Yerushalmi. In 1927, he published additional Yerushalmi fragments in the first volume of Ginzei Shechter. These were fragments that were in Elkan Adler's possession at the time Sridei Yerushalmi was published, and therefore were not included, as Ralag notes in his Hakdama to the Sridim. Right. Once again, he announces his intention to publish his commentary to the Sridei Yerushalmi. Source Gimel, Vinei kasher b'tzot Hashem hakavel l'hotzi l'or, b'zman karov ha'chelek hasheni shel Sifri Sridei HaYerushalmi, אשר בו ימצא קורא כל הדברים הנוגעים לכתבי יד הירושלמי, החצר בו ולא העיר רק דברים אחדים, הלילה שרידים. Here it sounds like he's talking more about codicological issues, if you look at what he says there. Anyway, and finally in his Akdama to his Perushim v'Chidushim, he assures us that although he has decided not to publish these commentaries, they do in fact exist. This is source Dalet. לא הייתה הבטחתי זאת אמירה לעתיד, שכבר היו בידי החומר לשני הכרכים, in other words, פירושים והערים, הערות ומבוא, אולם כשבאתי לקיים מוצא שפתיי, ניחמתי על דבריי. And why? So we saw already, because his ideas about how you write a Perush to the Yerushalmi have changed. In 1997, Professor Golinkin, while seeking material for his collection of responsa by Ralag, which Golinkin published in the volume Ma'aneh Levi, uncovered commentaries on the Yerushalmi written by Ralag. He asked me to look at one of them, which what I've called the Perush HaAroch al Yerushalmi Psachim, and to decide whether it was worth publishing, which I felt it was. Once I looked a little bit later at the other commentaries, it became very clear that these were none other than the Perushim v'Ha'arot to which Ginsburg had referred. Each page, starting now with his Perushim v'Ha'arot to Zra'im. Each page of his commentary on the Kta'im for Seder Zra'im has the heading, Perushim v'Ha'arot, and each dibur is preceded by the page and line in the Sridim on which it is commenting. The focus of most of these commentaries is a discussion of the Girsa'ot found in the Sridim, and comparison with Nusach HaDefus in the Venice edition, as well as Girsa'ot found in the Rishonim, sometimes Ktav Yad Romi. I brought you an example here. Remember the very first paper I gave the AJS, Moshe Bernstein asked me, will we be able to recite Birkat HaTorah? Fortunately, we won't, because we're not going to be able to learn the Sugi. But if you look at the next to the last page, you have Ktav Yado of Ralag, really beautiful, as opposed, well, then if you look on the other side, Perush to Psachim, which was written much later, you see changes in his Ktav Yad. Okay, so anyway, as I said, I'm not going to go through the sugya and what he says, just to say that essentially what he does here is, and what source is this, just for the record? This is source Hey. Ginsburg first presents the Nusach HaSridim and argues that the Girsan Defus Rishon is a result of a homatoloiton, hashmata idei adomod. He then explains the sugi according to the Nusach HaSridim and goes on to discuss the Girsa of the Radbaz and explains the view of the Rambam. And in a note, he clarifies the Girsa of the Melechet Shlomo. People think Melechet Shlomo has a different Girsa. Actually, he doesn't. It's just that he adds to the Girsa that he has an explanatory note. So Ralag's commentaries on the Ketayim from Seder Zra'im constitute what I am calling stage 1. Stage 2 manifests itself in his commentaries to the Ketayim for Masechtot from Seder Moed, namely Psachim, Yom, and Shabbat. Those are the ones that we have in our possession. These commentaries differ in character from the commentaries on the Seder Zra'im in a number of ways. First of all, the heading Perushim Ve'arot is absent. Second, these Perushim have separate pagination. There's actually one set of pagination for Yom Psachim, another for Shabbat. Commentary to Yom Psachim, corresponding pagination with 3-day Yerushalmi appears only sporadically. Corresponding lines not at all. Shabbat, corresponding page and line mentioned only once. But most importantly, we encounter a turn away from focusing mainly on textual criticism. The emphasis is now on understanding the content of the text. In addition, there are occasional excursions on a variety of subjects, the kinds of essays that abound in Ralag's Perushim V'Chidushim Yerushalmi. Anybody who's used it knows this. And to a lesser extent, you'll see when it appears, the Perush HaAroch to Mesechet Psachim. For example, in his Perush commentary to Mesechet Shabbat, there's a long discussion of the Yudchet Davar, the Shmonasar Dvarim, Shigazru Bo Bayom, are mentioned in the Mishnah in Shabbat. Okay. How are we doing?
10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes?
10 minutes till...
Okay.
10 minutes till
Okay.
18.
Okay, here we go. Okay, let's get this one. Ralag mentions specific Yerushalmi commentaries that he has written, but we have not found. Okay. Yogata v'lo matzata al ta'amin. We'll see if we ever find them. In any case, based on his own testimony, that of his son, it would appear that he was writing Yerushalmi commentaries constantly. In an article in the B'nai B'rith Messenger dated September 19th, 1924, based on an interview with Ralag, this is source Zion, it is stated that since being appointed to the faculty of the Jewish Theological Seminary, he has devoted all of his scant leisure in writing a commentary on the Talmud Yerushalmi, which he describes as an attempt to penetrate the entire structure of post-biblical literature. This is somewhat typical of Ginsburg sometimes makes, let's call them grand statements. His son Eli also describes his father's composing commentaries on the Yerushalmi as a lifelong endeavor. This is source Chet. You can read it for yourself. Again, I'm very conscious of the time here. Now, in 1934, in a series of interviews with David Druck for the Morgan Journal, Ralag makes a striking claim. What you have here is the Hebrew translation of his the interviews. This is source text. Ralag חיבר גם כן פירוש חדש על כל ירושלמי כולו, בו הוא מביא גם דעות המפרשים הקדמונים שפעמים הוא סודרן, פעמים הוא מסכים להם. העולם עדיין לא ראה את אור הפירוש הזה. הרי הוא מונח לפי שבקופסה שבארון, אך יכול ועתידו לראותו אם ישימו חכמי הדור אל ליבם את עוצם ערכה של היצירה הזאת. Rather mysterious statement. We'll come back to it. But in any case, I believe that we may be witnessing a a watershed moment for Rallag. He's describing a Yerushalmi commentary that, in his eyes, is of great value, a Perush Chadash. At the same time, he's nervous about publishing it. Okay, so I'm going to argue that this marks the beginning of the third stage of his writing of commentaries. In about 1930, Rallag began writing his Perush Aroch L'Psachim. How I know that? Read my introduction, you'll find out. Rallag completed the commentary sometime during or after 1935. Ditto. We know. Okay. Well, actually, I explain. We know this because in chapter 4 he mentions for the first time the Yerushalmi Kipshuto, which was published in Tafresh Tzadi Hey. Completed needs to be put in quotation marks. The commentary to the first section of chapter 5 ends abruptly in the middle of a sentence, also typical of Rallag. This means at the time Rallag is speaking with Druk, he has completed or written most of his commentary on Psachim. Is this the Perush Chadash, or at least an exemplar thereof? Seems to be likely that it is. However, when Rallag finally decides that the world should see his Perush Chadash, it is not a commentary to Psachim that he publishes, but rather a Perush to Brachot. And this project apparently begins in earnest in 1937. This is confirmed by Professor Lee Ginsberg in an article commemorating Rallag, published in the American Jewish Yearbook in 1955, an article published in Conservative Judaism in 1974. And let's see, where is this? Source. Okay, I'm not seeing it now, so I'll just read it to you. When at one of the meetings of our semi-centennial celebration, 1937, Mr. Saul Stroop, who was the chairman of the board of directors, said to Professor Ginsberg after one of his lectures, "I congratulate you on your amazing life work." Professor Ginsberg replied instantly, "My life work has not yet begun." He hoped that his life work would be a commentary on the Yerushalmi. Interesting statement. David Golinkin has discussed this in one of his articles. It would seem likely then, 1937, Rallag began writing, editing, preparing for publication his Perushim V'Chidushim. As his son said, he would come back to the same Perush again and again, so it wasn't a linear process. One might ask, if, as seems to be the case, Rallag wrote his commentary to Psachim, before his commentary to Brachot, he actually mentions his Perush to Psachim in his commentary to Brachot. Why did he publish Brachot and not Psachim? No clear answer. I'll offer a speculative one. By the time Rallag had written his Perush Aroch, Lieberman had published his Yerushalmi Kipshuto, which includes a commentary on the entirety of Yerushalmi Psachim. And there's significant overlap between Ginsberg's commentary and Lieberman's. On the other hand, Brachot lends itself perfectly to the kind of Perush Chadash that Ginsberg apparently aspired to write. Not merely, and perhaps not even mainly, focusing on the meaning of the text, but rather using textual commentary as a pretext for extended essays on halacha, agadah, lexicography, and the like. As Avram Goldberg points out in his review of the Perushim V'Chidushim, written after the appearance of the posthumous volume on Brachot Perek Hey, Ginsberg himself makes this clear in the full title of his Perushim V'Chidushim. Perushim V'Chidushim B'Yerushalmi Miyusadim al Mechkarim B'Shtalshalut Halacha V'Hagadah Be'eretz Yisrael U'Bebavel. Now, just to give you one example, you're making these broad claims about the difference in the character of these different stages. So I'll just give you one concrete example. In Perushim V'Chidushim, Volume 3, pages 67, 75, 82 to 90, Ginsberg discusses at length Nilat Sharei Shamayim, Nilat Sharei Heichal, exactly what are these times. On page 82 of his commentary on Brachot, where it would have been appropriate to discuss, to have such a discussion, it's absent. And there are many other cases. I want to turn now to the question of the intended audience of the Perushim V'Chidushim, and to use it to explain some statements made by Ginsberg in a number of places. Clearly, Ginsberg was writing for a scholarly audience. At the same time, he often wrote in the classical style of the great yeshivot of Europe. in short, as an Acharon would. And here I think we have to distinguish between Lieberman and Ginsburg. Lieberman was suffused with traditional methods of learning, but Ginsburg often talks about issues that are not directly connected to the text itself of the Yerushalmi, matters of halacha, and so on. So he's perfectly aware of the Achronic character of his commentary, celebrates it, and regards it as necessary for a true Yerushalmi commentary. After decrying the inadequacies of a purely philological approach, Baal Shanut, who he's talking about exactly here, we could discuss, for writing a Talmud commentary, he writes, "HaTalmud hu yachid b'mino lo rak b'tzurato hachitzonit, elo gam rucho hapnimi, lo higayon miyuchad hapilpul ha-talmudi, hamakarev et rachokim merachek et hakrovim. Hachadira leruach ha-talmud v'kitzur lashon havana ha-talmudit, hi hader shedarchu bo rabbeinu rishonim b'chidushehem alehem, v'hi haderech hayishara she'avor lo mefaresh ha-talmud. שאף שבכמה וכמה פרטים נחלקו שני התלמודים, רוח אחת לשניהם." I actually sent a note to Professor Schorsch. I found the phrase Ruach HaTalmud striking, and wondering if anyone's familiar with the literature of Wissenschaft as Talmud. Help me out here. Right. Yeah, so is this borrowed from the language of the German university? I did not find such a phrase, Ruach HaTalmud, except once in the Torah Tamim, obviously not on my own, through the Bar Ilan. Okay, so we have to study the Ruach HaTalmud. And we have to understand that there's an organic relationship between these two Talmuds. However, this understanding of the organic relationship between the two Talmudim is insufficient, and in fact will mislead a commentary who is not sensitive to the differences between the two Talmudim as well, as Ginsburg catalogs at great length in his Mafo, and therefore, for example, he has high praise for his ancestor, the Grub.
7 minutes unless you want discussion, then finish in 2
Oh.
minutes. So you have 7 minutes to
Yay.
25. You don't have to have discussion.
All right.
You can go
Yeah, I
to 25.
don't know if I'm able to
7
do that.
minutes.
All right. Ginsburg finds his ideal in Yisrael Levi's commentary on the first 6 chapters of Yerushalmi Bava Kama. He concludes his Mavo with these words: Darko shel Yisrael Levi beperush zeh, ha'emek b'mechkar halacha b'tzeruf bikoret mada'it, hi haderech ha'yishara ha'molicha mefaresh ha'talmud ha'bavli o Yerushalmi lahavanato ha'amitit, u'mi yitain u'mefarshei shnei ha'talmudim yelchu b'derech zo lahagdil Torah u'lahadira. Now note well, understanding and engaging traditional Talmudic discourse and its traditional interpreters is not simply a means to an end, that is, the writing of a scholarly commentary, however one understands that term. Rather, the traditional and scholarly approaches each yield a truth important in its own right, at the same time that they inform each other. Ginsburg was very sensitive on this last point, as manifests itself in several statements scattered throughout his writings. The following are the 2 most striking examples. Maybe I'll just do one. This is source Tet Zayin. He writes in an introduction preface to Gaonovka, Volume 1, "I have made it a point to call the reader's attention to certain interesting halachic views expressed in the fragments of the Gaonic Responsa. I was brought up in surroundings where the understanding of halacha was the chief subject of Jewish learning, and even now I cannot free myself of the view that halacha ought to be no less important than the correct spelling of an Aramaic preposition." His typical sarcasm, which I think is both maybe some arrogance and insecurity at the same time. Okay, and so to return finally to the ambiguous statement cited by David Druck, that Ginsburg was not sure whether the Chachmei Ador would appreciate fully the value of his commentaries. I think it likely that Ginsburg was referring to 2 different audiences, almost finished. On the one hand, and here I am substantially in agreement with David Lincoln's analysis, Ginsburg is probably thinking of the Rosh Yeshiva of the great academies of Europe. Would his commentaries find a place in the great yeshivot of Telz and Volozhin? Or would they be too heterodox to be on the shelf of a shrank in the Beis Medrash? In our time, certainly, at least in this country, we cannot take for granted when we walk into the Beis Medrash of a Haredi yeshiva that we will find a copy of Perushim v'Chidushin. On the other hand, Ginsburg was arguing for a kind of scholarship that took the traditional preoccupations of rabbinic discourse as seriously as the study of philology, source and redactional criticism in history, both because the first was vital to the successful use of the second, and because, in the end, the Talmudim are not simply artifacts to be analyzed, dissected, and contextualized. One goal should be, as he concludes his Mavo, lahagdil Torah hadira, in the fullest sense of that term. In sum, one might say that Professor Louis Ginsburg, the scholar, never ceased yearning to be, as well, Rabbi Levi Ginsburg, Ralag, a posek and an acharon, following in the steps of his reputed ancestor, Rav Aryeh Ginsburg, Shabbos Aryeh. Actually, it's not so clear that it was his ancestor. Another story. But always in his own idiosyncratic fashion. Thank you very much. 3 minutes. Anybody has a
So we
question?
open it up to questions. We have 3 minutes for questions. Does anyone, with any comments?
Not necessary, but if you have one, yeah.
Footnote in reference number 14, you have the slang line where it says, these are Talmud, it's these are Chai, you ask if somebody knows it's in here. He refers to it as these are Talmud.
Can you speak a little louder? I'm sorry. I'm not sure everyone could hear. Sorry.
Professor asked if somebody's familiar with the term Richa Talmud. I'm just pointing out in one footnote in reference point 14 that it's referred to as Richa Chai Shabatoicha. That is similar.
Yeah. I mean, he uses this ruach in several contexts, and I just find it a striking term. I don't know, perhaps someone more knowledgeable than I can say, well, this is not actually unique, but in my limited experience, I haven't seen this elsewhere. That's my point. Okay? Yeah, yes.
Hi, so this is fantastic. I'm curious, I think if I recall correctly, in Rocco, this is the Latin manuscript, just the line
I'm sorry.
I think if I recall correctly, in Rachot, so it's interesting because he's oftentimes working with the Gizit fragments, but he doesn't have access to the Latin manuscript. He has to rely on Elbogin, I think, who gave him the versions of Leiden.
Right.
Have you found in the other commentaries that he had access in some ways to Latin manuscripts that changed over time, perhaps?
He has access to a copy of Leiden, but we have to keep in mind this separate point that he's not, and he says this in his Mavo, he's not very impressed by Leiden. He doesn't think that Leiden adds anything to the Defus Rishon. So that was not, it's not very important to him to have that caveat before it. Yes?
Just as a clarification.
Can you stand up? We just need to hear your question. Thank you.
Shaw Lieberman, in the beginning of his commentary on Shalmi, makes an accusation there against Ginsburg. The Ginsburg Bornstein on his position on Rahot, yes or no? Yes or no?
This is not a courtroom. What's your...
Yeah, I just want to say, where you come to Lieberman, talking about Professor Lieberman.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Professor Ginsburg. I'm going to ask back, how would you reference on the accusation of enabling or
Okay, yeah, I'm very familiar with it. I forgot, I mentioned in the footnote in the Mavo, I forget the name of the, I think Zimmerman, Rabbi Zimmerman has a whole Ktav HaShama.
Yeah, no, this is Professor Ginsburg, Professor Lieberman himself writes.
Okay. I would say that, disturbingly, it does seem that in many cases, Ginsburg cites things without attribution. That's as much as I'm going to say.
Thank you so much. Oh, he's on. Oh.
Press the right arrow to move the slides. I know.
Now I would like to introduce Eliashiv Sherlow, who is the Harry Starr Postdoctoral Fellow at the Harvard Center for Jewish Studies, and he is speaking on Sridei Yerushalmi and the research of the Yerushalmi.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Milgram, for this symposium. I'm very glad to be a part of a symposium about the history of the research. It's a very important part of the research, and it's also fun to have some rechilut together, so I'm very glad to be here. And I want to start with an anecdote from David Rook books that Professor Diamond mentioned. And I recommend you to read this book from the start to the end. It's a very interesting book. Here. And I want to start with this anecdote. And I read it in Hebrew. כשגילה דוקטור שכטר את הגניזה בקיירה, ומצא אחר כך בין הכתבים שיעורים קטועים מן התלמוד הירושלמי, שאל, כפי שמספרים את רבי לויץ, גינסבורג, אם יש בהם בקטעים אלה משום ערך. רבי לוי השיב לו אז שיהיה להם ערך לאחר שיחבר את פירושו להם. וכן היה, עלים בלים אלה מיצירת חכמי ארץ ישראל, שכ-1500 שנה לא הושם אליה לב, שבו עתה לתחייה על ידי מגע הקסם של רבי לוי בספרו הגדול שרידי הירושלמי. Okay, so there is no doubt that this story it makes a strong impression and it reveals something about Ginsburg's character. But I'm sure that this story as it here didn't occur. And I want to do some fact checking for this story. It's not for the trust of the history of this story, but to demonstrate the history of the publishing of the Gniza fragments. So I will check this story, but it's not the goal, the final goal. So first, when Schechter, so to speak, discovered the Geniza, he was in England, in London, and Schechter was already here in the United States. I'm pretty sure that Schechter didn't know Ginsburg in this state, but maybe you can correct me. But I'm more sure that he didn't know him as a Yerushalmi scholar, because the first publication of Ginsburg about the Yerushalmi is Sridei Yerushalmi. He didn't publish anything about the Yerushalmi earlier, and it's very unlikely that Schechter sent to the United States to ask the opinion of Ginsburg about the fragments. And moreover, Schechter himself was a great scholar, and he had his opinion about the importance of the Gniza fragments. And actually, Professor Diamond mentioned it also, that he published, maybe Professor Milgram mentioned it, he published the first Gniza fragment of the Yerushalmi 2 years before he discovered the Geniza. He already published the first Geniza fragment of the Yerushalmi, and we will read something from his introduction to this fragment, and we can know that he saw great importance in these fragments. So I'm pretty sure he knew by himself the importance of these fragments. And actually, if we go further, the Yerushalmi fragments was one of the factors to the discovery of the Geniza itself. And I will not tell all the story about the Geniza discovery. I'm sure you know it, and if no, so it's another recommendation to read about this story. But when the Scottish sisters, Lewis and Gibson, came from Egypt with some fragments they bought there and asked Schechter about these fragments, so the first fragment he identified was a palimpsest with the Yerushalmi. And when he saw the Yerushalmi, he wanted to check the other fragment, and he recognized the Hebrew version of Ben Sira, and then he traveled to Egypt and purchased all the Geniza. So the Yerushalmi was the factor to discover the Geniza, one of the factors. Later on, when Schechter studied the Geniza, vast wealth of Geniza fragments, and he took out many fragments that caught his attention. And among other fields, he took all the Yerushalmi fragments he found and put them in a special box, as he writes to his friend Shmuel Avraham Poznansky. This is a letter to Poznansky, and from Tafresh Samech Bet, it's 92. מחר אם ירצה השם אלך בספינה עם בני ביתי לעיר ניו יורק, בארץ החדשה, והנה אמרתי שלא לעזוב הארץ הזאת, טרם דאגתי בעד הקונטרסים הירושלמי שמצאתי בגניזה. So we don't want to leave England before he care for the Yerushalmi fragments that he see as his own responsibility. And in a former letter he described, it's a former letter to Poznansky, והווה יודע כי מצאתי כמה קונטרסים מאת הירושלמי והם מונחים שם בקופסה לבדה. He tell him what he will find in Cambridge. כתוב עליה ירושלמי וכאשר תראה, אבל דע כי גם כמה מהפלימפססטים בסורית אשר הדפיסה הנדיבה מרת לואיס, כתב העליון הוא ירושלמי וכבר רמוז את זה בשמי וכו' וכו'. So he made the most of the work of Srida Yerushalmi, he made it by himself before he left London. Most of the fragments in the Srida Yerushalmi are found in the box that Schechter collected, and there are some fragments that Ginsburg identified and add, and for sure he did the work of publishing it, but the identification of the fragments is of Schechter. Further, Schechter had Schechter had also a plan for publishing the fragments, which is shared with Poznansky, and the candidate to do it wasn't Ginsburg. It was Ber Ratner, the author of Ahavat Zion Yerushalayim. He was the first candidate to do it. Here's the picture, and he told to Poznansky, והנה הצעתי יותר נכונה, כי החכם רטנר יעתיקם כולם מאת הפוטוגרפים אשר ישלחו לו, ויוציאם לאור בחוברת מיוחדת עם חילופי נוסחאות, מהוצאת ונדיג, ותו לא מידי. כי אין בדעתי למוסרם לו להשתמש בהם בספרו, אשר הוא מוציא לאל כעת, אהבת ציון וירושלים. Remember it, because I will back to it. כי דבר כזה יוכל להימשך ימים ושנים, ומי יודע אם ייגמר הדבר. ואתה השמיעני מה דעתך בזה, יוכל למצוא וכו', וגם כן אם נוכל לסמוך על הבטחתו. The promise of Ratner that he will not publish it as a part of his commentary, but as the fragments by themselves, כי העיקר בדברים כאלה שיהיו הדברים מפורסמים על ידי הדפוס. יוכל אחר כך להשתמש בהם בספרו כאוות נפשו. So this is the plan of Schechter before he leaves the United Kingdom. Later, when he came here to the JTS, and I don't know why Ratner didn't do this, because later he described that Ratner agreed to do it, but I don't know why not, maybe someone here knows. He gave this work to Ginsburg, and maybe in this point, something from this conversation that Druk write about, maybe something happened in this point, that they discussed the value of these fragments. And however, and this is my principal point, it seems that between Ginsburg and Schechter, the greater scholars of this institute, there was a disagreement on this matter and on the value of the fragments. Because Ginsburg responds, and it appears in Druk, that the fragments have value only with his commentary, is very plausible and fits his character as reflected in his writings, as I see. I don't know. I didn't, of course, know him. But in his view, the fragments had some value only as a foundation for commentary. And I put aside that he thought that he must write this commentary. Okay, put it aside. It must be part of a commentary to the Yerushalmi. But Schechter thought differently. We have already read what Schechter said, that he wanted to publish the fragments by themselves, not as a part of a commentary. And one can argue that it's only technically because it may take too much time, and we heard about the Ginsburg commentary that it takes a lot of time. But I think it was more fundamental, and I learned it from what Schechter wrote in his introduction to the first Gniza fragment of the Yerushalmi he published 2 years former to the Gniza discovery, and there he writes, that this consists mostly of fragments, but they date from so early a period and present so many unique examples that it is by no means an exaggeration to say that their publication will open entirely new fields of research to the student of Jewish literature. And this first new fields of research is what I think Schechter thought about these fragments. Of course, they can be used and they must be used for a commentary and to improve the text of the Yerushalmi. But they also can open entirely new fields of research. And similar things wrote Lieberman, another great scholar of this institute, when he describes Sridei Yerushalmi of Ginsburg, and he writes, אחרי שרידי הירושלמי אפשר למומחה להתחיל בבניין יסודי של מדע הירושלמי ובירורו ופירושו. להתחיל. And this is the initial point. This is the starting point, the Gniza fragments. This is not only addition to the commentary about the Yerushalmi, but the very beginning. And okay, and I want to demonstrate that this isn't an exaggeration, as Schechter wrote. It's not an exaggeration. Now, after more than 100 years of research, we can be sure that these fragments actually opened entirely new fields of research that based entirely on the Gniza fragments or almost entirely on the Gniza fragments. And I can give only a few examples that are very known. Okay, the first of them is Yaakov Nachum Epstein showed that the early manuscripts of Yerushalmi didn't have any Mishnayot. The Talmud was written without Mishnayot. You can see here a Gniza fragment that begins, it's Masechet Beitza, Ma ta'amun de Bet Shammai, without Mishnah. Only later proofreader add the first words of the Mishnah, Beitza shenolda biyom tov v'gomer, and we learn it almost entirely from the Gniza fragment. We can have clues in the complete manuscripts, but we learn it from the Gniza fragment, and it is very important recognition, both for the interpretation of the Talmud, because many sugiyot in our editions are not connected to the Mishnah that's written in the head of them, because the one who had the Mishnah did many mistakes, or the many that had the Mishnayot did mistakes, so we should interpret the sugiyot not with the Mishnah that's written in the head of them. And additionally, the absence of Mishnayot affects our understanding of the Yerushalmi as general, as Yaakov Zussman demonstrated in some of his articles, that the Yerushalmi, unlike the Bavli, it's not replaced the Mishnah. You can learn Yerushalmi by itself. You must learn Mishnah and then learn Yerushalmi. It's I can't describe it in a lens, but it is entirely other kind of book. And maybe the earlier Bavli was also such, but the Bavli, as we know it, is not such. Okay, other point. The Yerushalmi commenters and researchers in many places guesses that the Yerushalmi the scope of the Yerushalmi was bigger than our scope. Just a moment. And they raised hypotheses regarding missing sdarim, masachtot, and prakim, and also smaller pieces of the Yerushalmi. But only after the Gniza fragments we can check this hypothesis based on data. And again, it was Zussman that did it with all the fragments from the Gniza and showed very clearly that from the very first textual witnesses of the Yerushalmi, its scope was similar to our scope of the Yerushalmi. There is no big part of the Yerushalmi that lost during this generation, maybe before the manuscripts, but not since we have manuscripts. And from the other hand, we do find small pieces of the Yerushalmi, like sugiyot or paragraphs that are missing from our editions and found in the Gniza fragment. I can mention one sugya that Lieberman reconstructed in the end of Masechet Makot, and later it was found in Gniza fragment. And another sugya that Menachem Katz reconstructed in the end of Masechet Avodah Zarah, and recently I found a very tiny pieces that are probably the first textual witness of this missing sugya in the end of Avodah Zarah. It's not so important findings, but it's new, so I mention it here. Next, the field that is the most advanced field of the Gniza fragments research is the linguistic field, because several linguistic matters that we thought that distinguish between Babylonian and Palestinian works, or within parts of the from Yerushalmi Nezikin and the rest of the Yerushalmi, we now know that there are only scribal variants, and they are not. They have no real significance for these questions, while we do have other distinguished matters that we found only in the Gniza fragments. And actually, the Gniza fragments provide, for the first time, the good basis for reconstructing the grammar and vocabulary of the Palestinian works. And just now we can do it, and just now we have it. And we have some very, very important works on this subject. I gave here pictures of 3 PhD dissertations about these subjects, and a very important article of Professor Shlomo Naeh about the language of the Yerushalmi that are based on the Gniza fragments. How much time?
8 minutes.
8 minutes.
If
Okay.
you want to use.
Okay, I'm gonna jump. Okay, these are only a few examples. There are many other examples of new fields of research from the Gniza fragments, and I believe that we didn't finish. So we still have new fields of research that may be opened or just opened, and I want to mention only 2 projects that I am part of. One is the project of Professor Menachem Katz, from fragment to codex. The project, we try to reconstruct the original copies that the fragment came from, and maybe Professor Katz will talk about it later. Here you can see it's not from the Cairo Gniza, it's from the what's called European Gniza. It's fragments from Savona. A big monumental manuscript of Yerushalmi Seder Nezikin, and we try to reconstruct the codicological form of this manuscript. And the second project is my project that I studied the. Okay, thank you. The Te'amim, many manuscripts of the Yerushalmi from the Gniza have Te'amim, like the Te'amim of the Bible, that can teach us how to read the text and how to pronounce it. And if we can study the systems, and there are some systems of Te'amim in the fragments, we can have actually the most early commentary of the Yerushalmi, because the Te'amim gave us a commentary for the Yerushalmi. This is, again, a fragment from Masechet Beitza, and you can see here the Te'amim. Here you can see something like Bercha Kfula and Zigol. Okay, so in sum, This is our only example. And if we return to the story that I opened with, there is no doubt that the commentary using textual variants from the Gniza, like Ginsburg commentaries that I learned a lot about from Professor Diamond, is of great value. But the value of the Gniza fragments is much higher, as Schechter and Lieberman thought, and we can now know it for sure, and we can still wait for other fields of research that will be open with this fragment. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions. If you are asking a question, if you could tell us your name and then stand up while you're stating the question so everyone can hear it. You don't have mics, so I just want everyone to hear the questions clearly. So, question? Go ahead.
Jonathan Milgram. Could you tell us how the Te'amim assist in interpretation in terms of punctuation or end of a sentence or something maybe that would have been read differently if not for the Te'amim? I think for most of us that's new.
Yes. Unlike the Te'amim of the Bible, the Te'amim of Sefrut Chazal in general, not only Yerushalmi, have different Te'amim for rhetorical context. So we have Ta'am for Kushiyah, and sometimes for She'ela, and for Tzitut. So with this Te'amim, we can just go with the Sugiyah and see how to read, and sometimes it can affect the commentary. Yes, how we understand the Sugiyah.
Can I just add to that? Is it sometimes pointing to a marginal note? Like, would you have like something and then you would go out to the margin and you would see an added, like, would it point there or no?
Not the Te'amim. We have very important things, yes, in the margins, but not the Te'amim. Te'amim
No,
are
but
usually...
it will not key you to the fact that there's something in the margin.
No.
Any other questions?
Just an example from here. If you... Yes. חכמים אומרים עד שירשום יאמר מכאן ועד... סליחה, אוקיי. מחלף ושבטון דרבנין, בצנינן תמן, חכמים אומרים עד שירשום יאמר מכאן ועד כאן, just to learn some Torah. והאח העליון אומרים אחת, so this is טעמים for a question, for a קושייה, מחלף ושבטון. And always in this manuscript, when we have קושייה, these are the טעמים. Actually, this manuscript have טעמים almost only for קושייה, but recently I recognized that it's very complicated because the dots here change their place. If it's in the upper line, and this is also Te'amim. These are not the same dots. So we should learn it very carefully.
Yes.
Did you suggest that there were fragments of the Yerushalmi transmitted in a codex?
I don't understand. Right.
Say it again.
You showed the Yerushalmi in the form of a codex.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a very early,
Codex and not a scroll?
not a scroll.
We don't have scrolls of Yerushalmi. We didn't find it scrolls of Yerushalmi, no.
So it was always a codex.
Yes.
The fragments are always.
Yeah, what we found, yes.
What we found, we found from 9th, 10th century, not before.
But we found some scrolls of Bavli. We didn't find scrolls of Yerushalmi.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Maybe you will find text here.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
I'm introducing. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Marcus Mordechai Schwartz. He's actually my colleague in the Talmud department, but now holds the title of the Henry R. and Miriam Rip Schnitzer Librarian for Special Collections. And he's going to present on the 1523 Venice Discio Princeps, some reflections based on JTS library examples.
Very fancy title. I want to say I want to say three things. First of all, I want to thank Jonathan for the opportunity to talk and to share. It's tremendous for me to be able to do that. The second thing I want to say is how much hana'ah I got from these two presentations. I already told Rebbe Eliezer how much I enjoyed and appreciated his presentation. I've got to say, the Avodah Zarah and the Ta'amim were worth the price of admission. Really, really tremendous. The last thing I'm going to say is it's humbling to appear with my teachers, and in front of my teachers, and in front of a crowd that's as knowledgeable as this. I don't normally get the opportunity to talk in front of such knowledgeable crowds, and so that's a real pleasure. And Noah's here too. How about that? I'm very impressed that you're here. Okay. In 1959, one of the greatest of American bibliographers of the 20th century, Fredson Thayer Bowers, who I'm sure you've all heard of, wrote, I do not myself think it is pedantry to make a fetish of accuracy in scholarship or in criticism. Only a practicing textual critic and bibliographer knows the remorseless, corrupting influence that eats away at a text during the course of its transmission. The most important concern of the textual bibliographer is to guard the purity of the important basic documents of our literature and culture. This is a matter of principle on which there can be no compromise. One can no more permit just a little corruption to pass unheeded in transmission of our literary heritage than just a little sin was possible in Eden. Kind of blew me away. The juxtaposition of textual corruption and grave sin is sobering to reflect on, especially at a conference on the Talmud Yerushalmi, a text that was already known by scholars to have a deeply corrupted received textual tradition when it was printed for the first time in early 16th century Venice. One of the striking features of Yaakov Z. Meir's recent book about the production of the first edition of the Yerushalmi is his claim that the producers saw themselves as restoring some level of purity to the text through the relatively new technology of the letterpress. Heicha dahava kashe tahare. If a place was difficult, well, they could purify it. Meir's book has the felicitous title of Defus Rishon, or Editio Princeps, and this is a double entendre. It's a book about the first printed edition of the Yerushalmi, but it's also a book about the first early modern attempt to recover the lost, uncorrupted first text of the Yerushalmi as it was imagined in an initial ideal state. And that is an endeavor that we're still engaged in, as we just saw, in a greater or lesser extent. And though we know the results will be fraught and uncertain, we persist even so. Afal piche. Today I will present before you some reflections on the Venice 1522-1523 first edition of the Talmud Yerushalmi, based on examples of the edition in the JTS library collection. I have them right here. Though we have more than one example of the edition, we have only one which is complete, that encompasses every folio of the edition. Our JTS example, the complete example, which has long been acknowledged as existing in a variant state from most examples of the edition, will be the main subject of my presentation today. Before I begin, it's important for me to state clearly that as a rule, we avoid treating 16th century books of the same edition as presumed identical copies of one another. There is so much variation in books from the period of the common hand press that very frequently supposedly identical volumes of the same edition and even of the same imprint can vary from each other quite significantly. Therefore, I'm going to avoid using the word copy throughout this paper. I'm going to try and not use that word. I might mess up. And I'm going to try and use the word example instead to remind the listener of this point. So here are the two main points of the talk that you'll hear today. The first part of my talk, in that first part, I'm going to very briefly rehearse what's commonly known about the 1522-23 Venice edition. Produced in the house of Daniel Bomberg, its main editor was Yaakov Ben Chaim Ibn Adonia, and its proof reader and corrector was David Pitzigaton. I'll provide some brief, helpful context about them and their project. I will also summarize some relevant points from Meir's recent work in this part of the talk. I'll show that some of the groundwork that he's laid that allows me to speak in a new way about our JTS library variant example of the Venice Yerushalmi. Second, I want to present some new information about the variant state of our complete example of the 1522 edition today. I'm using methods developed in the field of analytical bibliography, particularly by Bowers and his students in the mid-20th century. I claim that we can plausibly identify at least 2 partial gatherings, encompassing perhaps as many as 8 folios of unproofed text imposed and printed from uncorrected type, as it was first laid in the form in 1522-23. One of these 2 gatherings is in Masechet Sota, long known to have relied upon more than a single manuscript tradition. I haven't had time really to engage in a textual analysis of these 2 choirs, the other of which is at the head of Masechet Brachot, and so I'm just going to end today's talk with a paucity of examples and give a few suggestions for how research on our invariant example could possibly continue. We know from the printer's colophon, that is at the end, that Yaakov ben Chaim ibn Adonia produced the editio princeps of the Talmud Yerushalmi in Venice sometime between 1522 and 1524 for the printing house of Daniel Bomberg. There's no date in the actual, it's not on the title page, it's not on the colophon, it doesn't exist, there's no date. So the dating of 1523 is based on the production states of other books that Ibn Adonia describes in a sort of quasi-advertisement of coming attractions in the colophon, like the Mishnah Torah, the Venice Mishnah Torah. Ibn Adonia largely based his edition on the only manuscript of the entire Jerusalem Talmud that we know of in our day. This manuscript is housed in the Leiden University Library in the Netherlands under the shelf mark Leiden Oriental 4720 or Scaliger 3. By the way, just very briefly, I know that I don't have a lot of time, but if you're interested in knowing how Scaliger's manuscript wound up in Leiden, you should read Chris DeHamel's book about manuscripts. He actually tells the whole story. It's an incredible story. Yechiel ben Yekutiel ben Binyamin HaRofeh wrote it out in, I think it's called Interviews with Manuscripts. Yechiel ben Yekutiel ben Binyamin HaRofeh wrote out the manuscript in 1289. The scribe admits he copied it from a badly corrupted text full of errors. He asks his readers for patience, explaining that despite his efforts to correct it, I know that I have not corrected even half the mistakes. We don't know how the manuscript reached Daniel Bromberg's print shop in Venice in the early 16th century, but once it arrived, it was first given to Cornelius Edelkind for correction, and there are a few crossed-out corrections from Edelkind. But in the end, Pitzi Gaton corrected it with thousands of annotations, sometimes just a single letter, others entire paragraphs. This corrected manuscript became the source for the first printed edition of the Talmud Yerushalmi. So Meyer explains how Venetian printers at the time viewed manuscript production as a long process of natural corruption. Only the invention of printing, they believed, could halt this decay. In their view, the printing press not only preserved texts, but also had the potential to restore them to their original pure state. To achieve this, they developed a new technique based on the latest philological insights from the Florentine academies. By comparing at least 3 manuscripts, that number's important, correctors could identify and fix medieval errors. And Ibn Adonia notes at the end of his edition that he used 3 manuscripts. The number is important. He actually used 4, but he says 3 because of the feeling in Venice at the time, I think. So does this mean 3 in total, or 3 to verify the main manuscript? And the answer to this lies hidden earlier in his remarks at the end of Tractate Shabbat. In the last 4 chapters of Shabbat, only the Mishnah was printed, since the Talmud was lacking in the manuscript. We heard Eliashiv talk about Zusman's work with the Pirkei Yerushalmi and all of that, and that they don't seem to have existed in any medieval manuscripts. Ibn Adonia printed an explanation at the end of the tractate. These 4 chapters before us, we found no Brightot in the 4 ancient copies we had, so there are 4 manuscripts. If these were likely partial manuscripts. 2 of them are now lost, but 1 survives, and that's MS Vaticanus Hebreus 133, copied in the late 13th, early 14th century. It contains about a quarter of the Yerushalmi, including Seder Zra'im, except for Masechet Bikurim, and Sota. It also has Sota from Seder Nashim. Though we can never know for certain, it seems the Leiden manuscript was corrected by Pitzi Gaton and Ibn Adonia, on the basis of partial manuscripts running much, but not all of its course. Fitzi-Gaton seems to have made most of the corrections to the manuscript. Mayer lists 5 types of corrections he made that Fitzi-Gaton made in rising order of significance. But I can skip this part if I'm running out of time. What time is it? How much time do I have?
You have time.
I have time? Okay, so then I'll conclude this part. Filling out, so here are the 5 types. You ready? The corrections that Fitzi-Gaton made. First, unification and consistency of spelling, right? He would change, for instance, dat mar to de temar. In other words, 2 words to 1 word. Filling out incomplete text with complete quotes from elsewhere. This is a lot of verses. Erasure of text that he held to be erroneously located or were just erroneous altogether. Switching the polarity of words that have the same absolute value, so teacher for student, asur for mutar, things like this, where they really just mean the same thing in terms of their absolute value. And the most severe would be imposition of variant texts from other manuscripts or other sources, or maybe from his own svara, over the Leiden text. This section of Mayer's book is 50 pages. It runs from page 123 to 173. It's the book's lengthiest single part. I think it's the part he sees as being like the biggest contribution. It probably is the biggest contribution. He lists over 100 examples, and he has 10 detailed case studies there. And I think it would be really a grave injustice for me to present any of his detailed analysis here in summary, given the time that I have. But you should read the book. If you can read modern Hebrew at all, you should really try and read the book. The irony, of course, is that the critical judgments and corrections of the Venetian printers, their acts of purification, often hide revealing manuscript variants from our eyes. It is a truism that any time that emendation is introduced into a text, the resulting work has, by definition, an eclectic composition, and maybe is further, not nearer, to an ideal ancient version. This is particularly true for an age long prior to a wider spread understanding of the historical development of medieval manuscript stemma and familial groupings, both of which developed as the field grew to increasing sophistication under figures like Paul Mass in the early 20th century. Before launching into the next section, which is going to be section 2, it seems wrong to me to talk about David Fitzi-Gaton today without acknowledging Shama Friedman's important 1993 piece on David ben Elazar Saul, Gershom Soncino's proofreader and corrector, who may have lived in the town. It got 8 minutes? How long do I have? Oh my gosh, that's great. That's fantastic. Okay, the important 1993, so as Shama Friedman wrote this incredibly important piece in 1993 on David ben Elazar Saul, Gershom Soncino's proofreader and corrector, who may have lived in the town of Fitzi-Gaton, and whether or not he was the same David Fitzi-Gaton that Ibn Adonia credits with the work on the Venice Yerushalmi and on the Mishnah Torah, the Venice Mishnah Torah, over a decade later. I really wanted to fit it in. I really did. It's not directly relevant. But it just feels wrong to me to move on without just acknowledging how important that work is. Because it's Shama. Our teacher. I'm going to move on to the part 2. So analytical bibliography studies the physical aspects of books. Format, pagination, illustrations, binding, and paper. It views books as objects made by people, shaped by the technology available at the time. Early printed books often fell short of their intended ideal. They show more errors and variations between examples than printers would have liked. But these flaws reveal much about how books were produced. The goal of this method, which I aim to demonstrate briefly, is to study books as physical objects to uncover their production processes. This involves examining the physical evidence in books alongside external sources like printers' manuals and contemporary accounts. Analytical bibliographers often use contemporary accounts of printing in different times. As I mentioned earlier, Meir does this to recover the then contemporary Venetian idea that printing could be a vehicle for the restoration of a corrupt ancient text. Yet the physical evidence found in the books themselves often tells us even more. Before continuing, I have to clarify 2 terms. Fretzenbauer's in Principles of Bibliographical Description in 1949 defined an edition as the whole number of copies printed at any time or times from substantially the same setting of type pages. He included all the variant states that you could find in such an edition. And a state refers to any variation in letters, meaning in types, from the ideal copy. So how did such variations in the text occur in the periods of the letterpress? So our teacher Moses Marks showed long ago in his 1936 monograph on Gershom Sancino that 16th century Hebrew printers in Italy rarely had the luxury of setting type into long galleys or printing hand-pulled galley proofs, nor did they usually follow the labor-intensive process of correction notation, page proofs, then correction, and then final printing. We're used to hearing about all that in the later period, but it's not what's going on in Italy in the 16th century. Type was set instead directly into pages, and all proofreading took place at this very advanced stage. Due to the thickness of the ink, proofs couldn't be pulled by hand, but required the pressure of a press. Contemporary accounts describe the proof correction process as follows. Once the compositor prepared and locked up a form, the type pages that print one side of a sheet, and you can see an example of a locked up octavo form on page 4 of the handout, right? So once he did that, he would take it to the pressman. The pressman had to stop the printing, so it was a stop presses moment, remove the form, replace it with one that to be proofed, print a few sheets only on one side for the proofs, then remove the printing form and replace the original to resume printing. After the proofs were read, the compositor would correct the type, and eventually the form would be sent back to the press. It should be clear that if these methods were in fact used, the proof correction of a book would be just as hidden then as it is in modern times, and any variance would, as in modern books, only be from the emergency repair of errors. However, that's not what we see. The evidence from the books themselves shows us that this wasn't the case. As Bowers notes, and many others, Moses Marks notes this too, many and maybe most 16th and early 17th century books exhibit variants within their sheets that are too numerous and too systematic to be the result of a late second thought. Instead, it becomes evident from the books themselves that a common proofing method, in fact probably the most common proofing method all over Europe, was to begin printing, send an early sheet to the proofreader, and then continue printing with the uncorrected type until the marked proof was returned. They didn't have time to wait. They had to make money. Once the proof was back, the press would then stop, the type would be corrected, and printing would resume with the corrected state of type. Now, it's been known for some time that the Venice title page of the Venice Yerushalmi has two states. The description in the bibliography of the Hebrew book, and it's still up, by the way, on the Hebrew University website. You can see it, the NLI website, I should say. It reads the following, right? Barosh miskeret hashar nidpusu hamilim pitchu sha'arim yesh tfasim shemilim elu nishmetu. In other words, State A examples include the words open the gates at the top of the title page frame, while State B examples omit these words. On page 1 of the handout, you'll find the title page of the JTS example, which contains the complete 7 minutes. I got it. On the handout, you'll find the title page of the JTS the complete JTS example, which contains the complete text of the Venice Yerushalmi. This JTS library volume is considered a State B example. However, a later reader wrote Bahano in the blank cartouche, which stands for, with the Lord's help, we will do and we will succeed. Amen. Be'ezrat Hashem, naseh v'natzliach. Amen. It seems that the compositor didn't place the types in the title page frame. The outer form was laid for printing before the correction was made. At some point, somebody noticed the mistake. I'm going to skip what I'm going to say about the second example. There's an incredible second example that seems to have been in the fire, but I'm going to skip it because of the time. If I have time, somebody can ask me about it. I'll be able to show that. I have not previously let me see. Okay, yeah, here we go. I had not previously encountered and we knew about this, State A, State B thing, but I had not previously encountered a State A, State B issue with Folio 21 of Seder Nashim and any published source until I found it myself. So if you turn to page 3 in the handout, you'll see Folio 21 of Seder Nashim represented twice in both JTS examples. This marks the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7 of Sota. The print here is small. I recognize it's small. I wanted to get both pages on the page, but the printer's error is so large that you should find it right away as soon as I tell you. On Folio 21, in the complete example is actually marked Yud Zayin. It's not marked Kaf Aleph, it's actually marked Yud Zayin, right? And not only that, but in that you can see. You can't see all the Yuds and Vavs that are turned slightly to the right and to the left because they're not properly, fitted in tightly into the furniture of the form. In other words, there are mistakes here. The print, so let's see. So what I was going to say, to recall, this example is long considered a state B example because of its laconic title page. So is the problem only in state B examples? Nope. I checked with the Chabad library who have a complete state A example, and their folio 21 of Nashim is listed as folio 17, as Yud Zayin, right? So what's going on here that you have more variation than has previously been known? The most likely solution is actually pretty straightforward. If you look on page 4, you'll see a depiction of a 3-sheet choir. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, so it's complex. The folded sheets produce six folios and therefore 12 sides. Pages 1 and 2 were printed on one side of the A sheet. The same thing's true they were printed on sheet 1, pages 3 and 4, the A side of sheet 2, pages 5 and 8, the A side of page 3. Alternatively, pages 2 and 11 were printed on B1, 4 and 9 on B2, 6 and 7 on B3. If you think about that, it actually works out. That's called imposition. Usually the A side of the sheets were all printed with an outer form first, and laid up in a pile. Do you mind if I just borrow this for a second? I'm just going to borrow this, right, just to show. Right, they're all laid up in a pile. And then what happens when they come along to print the other side, most often, is they flip the pile to the blank side. And that means that what we have is we actually have 3 potential states, right? What happens is, so this is, I wrote this out, so I'm just going to read it from here. This put the sheets printed on the A side at the top of the pile, making them the first to be printed on the B side. This means that the sheets at the bottom of the original stack, where proofreading had not caught errors in time, would now be at the top, ensuring that the earliest sheets show both forms in their uncorrected state. Overlap would occur as the corrected outer form backed the uncorrected inner form. Printing continued until both forms were corrected, creating sheets with corrected states with corrected states on both sides. This time and cost-saving measure meant that any folio in any example could show a completely corrected, half-corrected, or fully corrected state, right? And the process is like cutting and shuffling cards. That's actually what's going on here. So I think that I am out of time, right?
If you want no questions, you're...
Okay, so all I'm going to say is I wrote a whole thing about this, about the way that a facsimile of this guy Charlton Hinman made like an eclectic facsimile, photographic facsimile, using the photographs where he determined from a camera lucida the pages that were corrected and uncorrected in Shakespeare's First Folio, because the Folger Library has 83 copies of the First Folio, and he was able to check them all in one place, which is an incredible thing. If we were able to do the same thing with the Yerushalmi, like maybe by using high-quality digital images of every edition in the world and an AI platform, I think maybe we could make a similar kind of determination about variance. Now, he was trying to eliminate variance. We might want to find variance, and we may be able, and I don't know if this is true or not, but we may be able to recover traces of those lost to manuscripts from the variance that we might be able to recover. And that's where I'm going to end. Do I have any time at all for questions?
1 minute.
1 minute. Anybody have one question? Yeah, I thank you for the applause, by the way. I appreciate it. I stopped you. But that was, yeah, okay. I should publish this, right? I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to take a coffee break now?
Not yet.
or-
No,
Oh, not yet.
session, coffee break.
Oh, okay.
Maybe now.
All right, so new session.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
You can get up and stretch for a second. I'd like to call up the chair for our next session.
Yeah.
give them a second. It's hot in here.
Yeah, let people move.
Okay. Okay, she announced the coffee session. Let them get.
Do we have coffee?
Yeah, go ahead.
Should we take a break? You gonna
We'll
break
take a
now?
break for coffee. It looks like the masses have revolted. The schedule will now be adjusted. We'll still finish at the same time, but the coffee was needed earlier, I see, which is fine. We're flexible. Our next session is called Saul Lieberman, New Discoveries from the Archives and Digitized Recordings from the JTS Library. It's a pleasure to introduce Naomi Steinberger, Director of Library Services, who will introduce also the President of the State of Israel, His Excellency Isaac Herzog, who will come through momentarily.
No, okay. Good afternoon. Hi, it's so nice to see everybody here. Let's keep on schedule. So I get to introduce the President of Israel. Here he is. Oh, next one. Thank you very much. There he is.
Dear guests, dear friends, from the President's residence in Jerusalem, I congratulate you. As from Jerusalem to New York, it is a true pleasure for me to send my warmest greetings to all of you that have gathered within the tent of Jewish scholarship and Jewish intellectual endeavor, Be'ohala Shel Torah, in the historic halls of the JTS, to deepen Jewish scholarship, Jewish discourse, and our unending pursuit of knowledge. The richness, the wealth of the discourse, when minds meet each other in the love of Torah and love of human conversation, is a great gift of our peoplehood. It is a central legacy of the Talmudic tradition on which the Jewish people have flourished for millennia, and which you continue here today. I'm so delighted, therefore, that on a conference on the formidable subject of the Jerusalem Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, you bring special attention to two great giants and legendary JTS teachers who led pioneering study in this field of the Jerusalem Talmud in their lifetime. One is Rabbi Professor Levi Louis Ginsburg and Rabbi Professor Shaul Lieberman. I was personally honored to meet Professor Lieberman at a rooftop sukkah at JTS so many years ago. I was naturally in awe of this intellectual giant, but his relationship with my family reaches far beyond me. My great-grandfather, Rabbi Shmuel Yitzchak Hillman, who was based in London and then a great rabbi in Jerusalem. My late grandfather, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, Israel's first chief rabbi. My late grandmother, Rebbetzin Sarah Herzog, a pioneering Jewish leader, female leader, and my late father, Israel's sixth president, Chaim Herzog, and his brother, the illustrious diplomat Dr. Yaakov Herzog, were all contemporaries and acquaintances of this great man and his wife, Yehudit. And I had the honor and pleasure as a child and an adolescent to know the couple. Each of them, of my family, was a friend and intellectual companion of Rabbi Shaul Lieberman in some form. They shared insights, conversations, and mostly they shared an enormous love of our traditions and our people and an infinite commitment to serving them and furthering them in their lifetimes. I want to thank the organizers of this conference, Dr. Jonathan Milgram of JTS, my good friend, Professor Aviada Cohen, President of the Sha'arei Mada u'Mishpat Academic Center in Israel, who has uncovered fascinating correspondence between Professor Shaul Lieberman and my late grandfather, and Professor Menachem Katz, the driving force behind the ambitious virtual Jerusalem Talmud project. I thank them all, and I thank all of you. May the ideas exchanged at this conference enrich the living conversation we share, and may they be a blessing on the memory of Professor Lieberman and Professor Ginsburg. May we know days of wisdom and peace. May our hostages come back as soon as possible to their home. Be'atzlacha v'yishar koach.
Wow, what an inspiration. He should be doing the negotiations. Okay, no politics. It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Aviad Cohen. He is the president of the Academic Center of Law and Science in Israel, in Jerusalem. Nope, sorry, where? Hod Sharon, okay. And he's going to speak about Professor Saul Lieberman, the Jerusalem Tanakh from New York, new discoveries from the archives.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here, and I would like to thank very much our partners, organizing this stimulating conference, the JTS, of course, Professor Milgram, Professor Katz, my colleagues here, and Professor Modi Schwartz, which I spent in the archives of the JTS last week, few days, and I hope to do this this week as well. Nonsense is nonsense, but the history or the study of nonsense is a scholarship. That was Professor Lieberman welcoming to Gershom Scholem. And I'm going to speak about nonsense, but I hope that some of the nonsense will teach us what scholarship is. You can see here Professor Lieberman looks at us and he's smiling, and he has a good reason to smile. I would like to start with a quiz just to wake you up a bit. It's 4 o'clock tea now, so people usually sometimes on these hours. There are 2 letters here. I won't tell you who wrote them, but I just want to read 2 lines from the right side. Chaiml, and I'll translate it in the middle. Immediately, Chaiml התחיל אתמול ללמוד חומש, שמחה גדולה, כבר הוא בקיא בפסוק אחד על פה, הקטן מתקנא בו. Chaiml, little Chaim, just start to study Chumash. That's a great pleasure. And he knows already 1 verse by heart. And the little one is jealous of him. That's 1 letter. The left letter was written 10 years afterwards. And then I just read again just a few lines from the middle. תודה רבה על התעניינותו הלבבית בבננו חיימל. Thank you very much that you are interested in my son Chaiml. I don't want to bother you. די לו לבני להיבחן על ידו פעם אחת בחודש. You can test him only once a month, that's enough. That's the quiz. We'll keep it for later, so you will be awake. How did I come to deal with Rav Shaul Lieberman and with the archives? That's, a kind of illness, but once upon a time, in this case, I was quite young, about 40 years ago. I walked in Jerusalem, and there was a bookstore in Rehov Keren Kayemet, 8. This bookstore closed, unfortunately. And I don't know if you know bibliophiles, but it's like butterflies. When they see the light, you cannot not go in. So I went inside the shop. It was a small shop, piles of books, and then on the corner there was piles of print-offs. On those days, there were no computers, so people, every scholar that wrote an article, he wanted to give it to his friends, but the whole journal was very expensive, so they used to print off very thin ones. There was a pile there. I looked at it and I saw that there are some akdashot, dedications to Professor Lieberman. Professor Lieberman just lived around the corner in Ben Maimon 22, and probably after he died, so it was about 84 when I saw this, they just took the whole piles of these prints off, and they gave him to the bookstore with some very few books, because the main library is now in the Shoken Institute, in Shoken Library in Jerusalem. So I asked the seller how much is it. He said to sell me something like $10. Nothing, really nothing. I bought the whole lot, and that was very nice. I came home, starting to see the print-offs. There were regular articles now. No one needs them because everything is the computer. But in one of them, I opened them, and suddenly 2 letters drop. And these 2 letters are by Immanuel Lev. Immanuel Lev was the great scholar from Szeged, from Hungary, Flora the Juden. He was a great scholar. And these were letters that he wrote to Shaul Lieberman, לכבוד הרב הגדול מורנו שאול ליברמן בעיר הקודש שלום וברכה, on the right side. And also on the left side. And this letter, specifically the letter in the left, Lieberman all his life was very proud of it. People already here mentioned the Gra, because on this letter, Immanuel Lev said to Lieberman, in your books, in the Tosefet Rishonim, I could see ניצוצות מרוחו של הגר"א. I can see something from the Vilna Gaon. And Lieberman was proud of it, probably put it in one of these print-offs to keep it. But after his death, it could be thrown out. I saved it. It's in my Tosefta Kipshuta. I put it in the book, not over it. I published it, by the way, about 35 years ago in Madai Yadut. So this is how I came to the whole story. And I'm going to go for a very, very short tour with photographs, with some manuscript, with some letters, just a short and very quick, and you'll tell me where should I stop, because it's a much longer trip. Charles Lieberman was born 3 times. He was born in 1898 in Motele, somewhere in Belarus, very far remote. It's a small town. You would think that it's a huge town like New York, because Chaim Weizmann came from there, and some other very, very prominent figures. But it's a small shtetl. But in this small shtetl, Charles Lieberman was born. We don't know nearly anything about his childhood until he was about 30. We know that he went to the Malchi Yeshiva, then to Slobodka. What did he play with? Who did he play with? But there is one story that his Chosid, Tuvia Preschel, wrote about him when he was 60. And in the beginning of the article, he describes how Lieberman's life, and he said this story, and I'm sure that Lieberman told him the story. He didn't know it from himself. And the story that when Lieberman was a young boy, about 8 years old to 9 years old, one of the great rabbis from Lithuania came there, and he tested Lieberman, asked him questions, and when he saw this is a real giant, he wrote him a letter of recommendation, how going it is, how genius he is. So Lieberman, the child, was so happy. He ran to his father. His father looked at the letter, tear it up to pieces, and said, until now, I knew that you are only Bur ve'am haaretz. Now I know that you are also a fool. What did you learn already the whole Shas? He said, no, only half of it. He said, when you learn the other half, please come to me, then maybe we should speak. And you might laugh, you think that it's just a story. I think Lieberman didn't forget this story ever, because you have to know that when he was 12, he left his parents' home, never saw them again. Just think about it, a child, 12 years old. But this was, by the way, this was the tradition in Lithuania. You have to know everything, the whole Shas, that's obvious. It's not something great. And you go, when you are a child, before his bar mitzvah, he went to Malch, then to Slobodka, to study in one of the great yeshivot. What happened afterwards? Lieberman studied in Slobodka with many other great scholars that then afterwards became great rabbis. But until he came to Eretz Israel, to Jerusalem, at the end of 27, we don't know anything about him. Just think, he was about 30 years old when he came to Jerusalem. What happened in those years when he left Slobodka until he came to Jerusalem? A big hole. We don't know nothing about it. Lieberman always didn't want to speak about all those years. I found out, and maybe we'll see it later, I found out a form that he filled, and he said, what was your profession before you came to Eretz Israel? I was a socher, businessman. Lieberman business. But he was born again at 28 when he came to the Hebrew University, very quick. A year before, he married his first wife, Rachel Rabinovich. Both of them had great iches. But iches is not enough, because iches relate to your forefathers. My grandmother, who had a great iches, also used to say that iches is via kartoffel. It's like a potato. Why? The best part is in the ground. So Lieberman had to build his own career. And he went to the Hebrew University. You can see him here, Lieberman. His wife died a very short time after that, his first wife. And then he married Judith Lieberman, the daughter of Meir Bar Ilan, the great Mizrahi leader, and they lived many years together. You can see Lieberman here. This is a rare picture. I didn't see, no one, I think, I have it. I found it in Meir Bar Ilan's, his nephew, archives. He gave some of his private archives to Meir Bar Ilan. And this is the Judith and Lieberman, you see, with the white suit. Looks like a film star. This is in the Meir Bar Ilan apartment in Jerusalem. And you can see a different kind of Lieberman. We think of Lieberman sitting all day. This is Shaul Lieberman and Judith, and Shaul Lieberman boat in a boat. And this is another two photographs of Lieberman. And then he finished his studies at the Hebrew U. You see, he got his MA. It wasn't then, there was no Chug Talmud, Department of Talmud. It was the Machon Lemadei Yahadut. And he got his degree, MA, which he always writes, Shaul Lieberman MA, on his, also on his letter, Shaul Lieberman MA, because he didn't have ever a PhD. He wanted to, but he didn't have, so he was an MA, of course, B'me'uleh. But that's not enough. There are many scholars, as today, that maybe they are great Talmidei Chachamim, they know a lot of Torah, but they have no parnasa, no money. And they're the one who have the money, but don't know so much Torah. So Lieberman had to earn some money, and he went to be a teacher. And on the left side, I found out again, this is in a different place. Shaul Lieberman, Pekudat HaChinuch, according to the British laws, then he had to have a permission to teach. And here you can say, he said Shaul, M.A., you see, Shaul Lieberman, his father's name Moshe. What is the profession of his father, Rav? By the way, you see, he wrote Lieberman, not Lieberman, but Lieberman. Okay, that's not enough. Already when he was young scholar at the 30s in Jerusalem, Lieberman was eager to buy books. Yes, there's a very famous quotation by Rabbi Yitzchak Panton, one of the Spanish sages in the 15th century, who said that your wisdom is where your books are. And Lieberman at the 30s already, you see, so Lieberman, he lived in his father-in-law and mother-in-law house, and he bought books. So here you can see his book order from Bamberger at Worman, who was the famous bookstore in Jerusalem. And here he bought books from Bryant Avenue, and he bought books from Shapiro and Valentine in London. As I've said, like a butterfly that see the light, he bought a lot of books. And what is very interesting, and you can make a whole presentation on this, is what books he bought, but this is for another time. 35, Lieberman left Hebrew U. 3 years later. He was fired, actually. There were two classes, one of Gedalia Alon, one of his. The university, he had many students. He had 3 students, and Gedalia Alon had 10 students, just to give you a clue what was it like then in the Machon Lemadei Yahadut. And they decided that only Gedalia Alon would continue teaching. And Lieberman, again, needs a parmanoses, so he went to establish with others the Machon Eri Fisher. And at that year, before that, of course, at 29, he published the Ala Yerushalmi. Then in 31, Talmudah Shel Kisrin on the Yerushalmi. And in 35, he's starting to write Perush Ala Yerushalmi. You can see Perush Miyusad Gedash Yerushalmi. But this is very interesting again, because it's not just a regular edition of the Yerushalmi. You should have it in this library, but unfortunately it's in Merkaz Harav library in Jerusalem, the right one. And you can see the dedication. לכבוד מרן רבן עד ארץ ישראל ורבן של כל בני הגולה, הגאון רבי אברהם יצחק הכהן קוק, ברגשי הערצה וכבוד מאת המחבר. Yes, for Rabbi Cook, with admiration and honor, מאת המחבר. Rav Cook passed away on Elul 35. The book was published in 35. So it must be that he gave him the book at that year. What for? Why? They used to learn together, Rav Cook and Shaul Lieberman together. They had a chavruta, they learned Tur Bet Yosef, but they had an agreement that no one should cancel. They had a fixed date, and no one should cancel what forever. But one day, Rav Cook, who was the chief rabbi, was called to be a Sandek. He said, well, we do all kol hakavod, but I want to be a Sandek, and he went, and Lieberman didn't forget it. He came to his house on Purim. When Rav Cook had the Suda, Rav Cook was already quite ill, because he passed away a few months later. He was quite ill. And look at the left side. Rav Cook gave him his book, Reish Milim, which is a Kabbalistic book. You want to understand. I don't see the connection between one sentence and the other. It's very, very Kabbalistic. No, it's not. I'm not saying it's very, very difficult text. And Rav Cook wrote to him, see what Rav Cook wrote to him few months before he passed away. Matnata avat emet libchir levavi. It's a present of true love to bchir levavi, to my best. And when was it? Purim the Prazim Tafresh Tzadikei. It was the day before Purim. In Jerusalem, we celebrate Purim on Tetvav Be'adar. This was on Yudaled. So I think, I have a suspect that Lieberman came to him and said, well, you remember that you canceled, now we have to study something, and that was their Mishloach Manot. It's just, but this is something, because as I've said, we can see here, when he gave him the book, when he got the book. Okay, now I'll just run very quick. Lieberman had, of course, connections with his cousin, with the Chazon Ish. Professor Katz wrote an article. I published this postcard on the left side. And the Chazon Ish here was the greatest, considered to be one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Israel, said, well, abkiut lo bihi. I am not such a baki, but you are the baki. And it's a letter of Divrei Torah. Professor Katz published it, as you can see in the article. On the right side, it's a letter of Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik was also a relative of him because Yehudit Bar-Ilan connected to the Natziv family, and the Soloveitchik and J.B. Soloveitchik and the Natziv were relatives. This is from, because of the time I'm running on. I just want to speak about the third time that Shaul Lieberman was born. At 1940, again, he had no parnasa. Harry Fisher wasn't his dream. And then, or before that, Levi Ginsburg visited Jerusalem. He came when the Machon Madayot was opened, the Hebrew University. Now we are going to celebrate 100 years. So he came specially, and there probably he met Lieberman. They had few letters between them. Some of them are here in the archives. And then Lieberman goes to the States. Here's the She'elon. I told you an interview about your life, and here he writes that he was a socher. These are the famous picture of the three giants of the on the right side Lieberman, in the middle Louis Finkelstein, and on the left Marx that you spoke about him. On the left side you see Lieberman is green in his library here at the seminary, and you can see on the left side here Professor Lieberman here. He could be naughty. You see how many books he got in his table, and that's how he works. We'll see in a minute. That's how he works. He works together, not with one book, not with two books, but with dozens of books. On the right side, Alice Lotnik just make an etching of him, and wow, an etching of him, and this is on the new book. You see Lieberman in his library always with a cigar. You see the right side and the left side. Here with Shai Agnon, you see what he holds in his hand. On the right side, in Kerem Marta Vineyards, he used to go there. I just skip to some of the seminary papers. Of course, Lieberman wasn't was always a nice guy. Sometimes when he thinks that someone was full or something he disliked, so he used to say harsh things to them. One of his major opponents was Heschel. Heschel was a Chussid, he was a Misnaged, and apart from that, he disliked. But afterwards, always, Lieberman was such a mensch that if he hurt someone, he used to write him a letter. And here Heschel wrote him back. I just read 2 lines. Yakiri Reb Shaul, Nero Yair V'Yizrach, Baruch tiyeh, a man should always speak not with a lot of energy, but sometimes, some people, he didn't say woo, of course he refers to Lieberman, are starting to be too tempestuous, and even though they were rivals. I wanted here to bring some of his again, I'll skip, you see what you are missing, but yes, how did he work? People think that Shaul Lieberman was a genius, so he just knew everything by heart. That's very simple. He brings from this source, from that source. But Lieberman studied all the time. When he was at it, like Churchill said, yes, when he was at home, he studied when he was at home, he studied when he was outside. He studied in the morning, he studied at night. He studied in meetings, he studied in his Beresh, and you could see it by some of the papers. We would think they are nonsense. They are here in the library, in the archives. You see in the left side, it's a card of the library of JTS library. And he couldn't remember himself, so he wrote on this, he wrote some words in Greek. On the right side, he got an invitation, not more than his cousin, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the brother of J.B. Soloveitchik. He got the invitation, you would think he would keep it or something, but he got the invitation, and already from 4 sides, like in the Gniza, he writes notes. You could see his energy in writing. And also on the left side here, you see this is some of the proofs of Tosefta Kipshuta. He works very hard. Don't think that because he was a giant, he works very, very, very hard. Here on the Global Classical Library, one of the covers, again, he writes notes. I don't know if the library would like it, but maybe it was his own copy. On the right side, he sat in a meeting at Bar Ilan University. Again, they were talking about the Bar Ilan issues. He was writing all his ideas about the memoir. Lieberman, of course, got a lot of admiration. You can see two left side there. There's just of appreciation. Just two examples. The right one from Harry Truman, and on the left side from the Supreme Court, the President of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice Earl Warren. And now it would just like to conclude. I'm coming to the conclusion. Lieberman didn't have children. He had, even though he was the most renowned scholar maybe in the Talmudic field. He got prizes, the Israel Prize. He got a doctorate honoris from Harvard, from the Technion, from everywhere. He was actually quite a tragic figure. He didn't have children, but when he saw children, people who davened here in the seminary, all Shabbat, he was the chief gabbai. Always when he saw a child, he was a different Lieberman. You can see on the right side, this is a famous picture of Dov Losnik's daughter. On the left side, at the bottom, he had a far relative called Rachel. So he said, מאוד הקפדתי לך, I didn't like that you didn't write to me, but as a good Jew on Yom Kippur, I forgive you. Here you can see some of his dedication to children. On the right side to his nephew, Meir Bar Ilan, למאיר כחביבי ויקרא מאת הדוד שאול. He was an uncle. On the left side, my cousin, Duel Peli, the son of Pinchas Peli. He wrote him for his bar mitzvah, יקירי וחביבי, ליום ייכנסו למצוות. And also when he was in Jerusalem. So Yitzchak Yakiri, Yitzchak is the son of Yaakov Herzog, not of Chaim Herzog. Yes, Yitzchak Yakiri. He went with him. He told me that when he had a birthday, he used to go with him to the shop. And look what he bought for him. Otzar Hamadal Livnei Haneurim. Just. In the later years, as I have said, Lieberman was a different Lieberman. Everyone knows him, everyone admires him. Here you can see a nice picture. Do you recognize who is the man? Nir Lieberman? That's Eli Wiesel. Eli Wiesel used to come here to the seminary. The little boy is Elisha Wiesel, if you know him. Lieberman next to the Western Wall, and here on Har HaZeitim. And I just want to conclude with two documents, and we'll conclude. This one is very famous pictures. It's in the seminary, in the hall, and it was on Hoshana. Oh, it's here. Oh, I didn't know. I don't see the, I wasn't here then. So they had Hoshana Rabbah. You see on the right side, they're walking with the Lulavim. On the left side, Lieberman with his talit. But this is a very interesting picture. Because here you can see three of the giants of the seminar. On the right side, Lieberman. In the middle, Heschel. On the left side, Finkelstein. And as they said, one picture worth sometimes more than 1,000 words. Look, Finkelstein put on tefillin. Lieberman and Heschel have no tefillin. Lieberman and Finkelstein had the atara of silver, Heschel with a modern talit, and that's the story. If you understand what the difference is, and by the way, of course, Finkelstein put on tefillin because according to Minhag HaGradim, it's Nagdim, you put tefillin on Chol HaMoed, but Lieberman was Litvak, he didn't do it, and Heschel as well. Lieberman was also a very big donor. He had a lot of money, he did a lot of money in the stock market. Once he met my uncle here, Pinchas Peli here, on 8 in the morning. He asked him, how much money have you earned today? So my uncle looked at him, and today it's only 8 in the morning. What do you mean? So I've earned already $20,000 in the stock market. But here, apart that he had money and he knew how to live the good life, apart from his studies, on the right side you see he gave tzedakah to Chabad. A year before he passed away, and the Rebbe wrote notes on him, and the Rebbe Milubavitch wrote to him that you should live double life like in the Yerushalmi, Rab Chagai. You see Rab Chagai on the right side, these are the wording of Rebbe Milubavitch. On the left side, he got a few prizes. When he got prizes in Israel, he said, I don't want the money. It's not appropriate that someone who comes from abroad will use the money of you for poor Israel. So please give the money of the prize, give it to students in Israel for a reason. Here you can see again for the center of Taharat HaMishpacha, and this is the love of Lieberman to Medinat Israel and to Eretz Israel, even though if he lived there, he lived all his life at Tanam in New York. He was not only in the Talmud Yerushalmi, but also in Yerushalayim. So here it was the United Jewish Appeal in 73. He gave, through Judith Lieberman, $40,000, and here he wrote to Rabbi Nadich, Mr. Lieberman, Mrs. Lieberman, I close our personal check of $50,000. That time it was a lot of money. At 73, without thinking, and look what he writes afterward, I appeal through you to all the members of our congregation. Please double and triple your efforts on behalf of the state of Israel. Our brethren in Israel are bleeding for us as well. Be part of them. I think this letter says, okay, but 2 minutes. What will be with Lieberman in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time? You see Lieberman is still alive. On the left side for my family newspaper, Panim Panim, at the 60s. On the right side, that's an article. You see the seminar building that was published just a year ago. And now we're coming to the quiz that we started with. These are letters of Rabbi Yitzchak Alevi Herzog. Rabbi Yitzchak Alevi Herzog knew Lieberman already at 25 when he was in Dublin. And he wrote him, this Chaim is Chaim Herzog, the 6th president of Israel. He said he's starting today to study Chumash. He knows one verse by heart. 10 years later, at 35, he begs Lieberman, don't test him every week. He was no, once a month is enough. So just to finish, Lieberman was buried. As you can see, what was written on him was Tzva, not a giant, not a Gaon. Rav Shaul Barav Moshe Lieberman, Shelshelet HaYuchasin. 2 words. He saw himself as part of a chain of Gdolei Torah, and he was buried, if you see on the right side, next to Yaakov Herzog. These were ties, there were 4 generations, starting with Rabbi Hillman, as the president say, with Rabbi Hillman, then with Yitzchak Alevi Herzog, his 2 sons, Chaim and Yaakov, and the 4th generation, Yitzchak Herzog. Thank you very much.
Take 2 minutes of questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Please identify yourself.
Isaac Roslin. Thank you, that was wonderful. Just some things I read about Lieberman, which I was wondering if you see in the archives. One, apparently it's been reported that he actually did a correspondence course in medicine.
He studied 1 year medicine in France, in Nancy, not in Paris, and he left it.
And then the other one I've seen is that the death of his first wife, at least it was rumored that she died in childbirth.
We don't know why. In the book that was published in the biography, it says that because she had some problems in her birth, when she had to give birth. But I have heard a very powerful story, I don't know again if it's true or not, that Lieberman felt very, very guilty because he had no money to buy her medicines in the pharmacy. And then after that, he was really, really upset. Yes, please.
Hi, so thanks for this. Whirlwind's work with Lieberman's life. One thing which I noticed in the Epstein archive at Mount Scopus is that after, I mentioned at the beginning and end of his career, they asked Lieberman to come to replace him at Hebrew University, and he refuses to put in writing why he won't come. He says, as I've told people...
To write what, sorry?
He won't put in writing his reason for not coming. Lieberman is asked to return.
Yeah, that's right. But I just want, okay, yes, so you want... Okay. First of all, they beg him. That's true. The rectors of Hebrew University in the 50s, after he was fired, and he had to escape, actually, Professor Asaf, who was his good friend, asked him to come back. Professor Binyamin Mazar, the ecologist, who was the rector, the president, asked him to come back. Lieberman he had such a good memory, he never forget what he did to him. So even though, so even though he donated some money to the Hebrew and he got, after many years, he got a honoris, he never wanted to go back. But one point I would like to mention, people say that Epstein was jealous of him, and that's because of this, he left the Hebrew University. It's not true. Lieberman had 1 photo in his pocket all his life, and that was the photo of Yaakov Nachum Epstein. The only person in Tosefta Kipshuta everywhere you'll see Maharin, because this Rabbi Agaon, Maharin, there is Moreno Arav, there is only 1 person, Epstein, and here in the archives as well in Jerusalem, Epstein wrote letters to him after he left. He wrote Epstein, after Epstein passed away, he wrote to his widow and to his child. And what is a must to see, I couldn't bring it here because of lack of time, that how was the lessons there at 28. So Epstein, I found a note in Epstein archive in the Hebrew. Gedalia Alon gave his exam at 1952, and I gave him the second part in 1957. Lieberman gave me the exam at 1914 too, and he was such a yeke. Lieberman was the opposite of yeke. He was a genius, but not a yeke. These two like fire and water, but he admired him all his life.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Next, I want to introduce my colleague, David Kramer, who is the Joseph J. Dora Bell Librarian and Professor of Talmud here at JTS. He's going to speak about the newly digitized recordings from the JTS library, Saul Lieberman's interviews, lectures, and eulogies. But before he speaks, let me tell you a bit about this project. We received a large grant from the National Archives about 2 years ago to catalog and to digitize 1,750 recordings that were here at JTS, documenting the Jewish experience during the second half of the 20th century and into the beginning of the 21st. The areas of study were American politics, law and ethics, interfaith relations, arts and literature, discussions with Jewish leaders, and the life and works of Abraham Joshua Heschel. The two Lieberman recordings are unique and were until now not available. And if you take a look on our digital library site, these digitized archives stand really as a landmark of the achievement and the preservation of Jewish culture, both here in the United States and Israelis coming to the United States, leaders such as David Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir and others, and American leaders, both Jewish and not, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Martin Luther King, Harry Truman's visit to the JTS library, and many others. So without further ado, I'm introducing my colleague, who will talk just about 2 of the 1,700 recordings that we have.
Okay. Oh, it's up and ready. Thank you, Chris. Have we thanked you collectively? I'm Chris for the... and I do want to comment, thank you, Naomi. Some of you in this room know, but not everybody, that Naomi stepped back from her full-time position as Director of Library Services in the library just last Thursday, the last day of the work week last week. So she's here with a follow-up appearance, and any of you who has ever done research in this library in the last many, many years, you owe a great debt to Naomi. So really, thank you.
Thank you.
Before I begin, this is going to be the entertainment portion of the program. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. But before I begin, as we were looking, Aviad, at those pictures that you showed, which you learned were in this room, right? A place carries memory with it. And place is haunted, in the best sense of the term, with the people who occupied it in the past. So as you showed those pictures, I was picturing right over here, Finkelstein, Lieberman, right over there, Marjorie, you got it right? Right, Halivni, right, one row back. I mean, it's just astounding to see the presence of those people and what they, what they left us with, because it really is remarkable. So, as I said, the entertainment portion, we have just a couple of recordings from Lieberman himself, and they are available. What I'd like to do is play selections from one of those recordings, and it's a very, very interesting recording. Some of you will recall that in the 1950s, Finkelstein was very ambitious, very energetic about creating institutes here at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which were very outward-looking. He sought to bring together here at JTS spokespeople, thinkers, opinion people from a wide range of fields. It was science, it was ethics, it was social justice, and so forth. There were different permutations of this. And the point of this was to open broad conversations, which he felt Jewish tradition and experience had something to contribute to. So what we're about to listen to, and it's in two sections. The first is about 10 minutes. The second is just a few minutes. So it's the early part of the presentation and then his conclusions, Lieberman's conclusions. Finkelstein invited Lieberman to speak about contemporary issues. Unfortunately, it would require a deep dive into our archives to find exactly what the occasion of this recording was. We don't have the documentation on it. It would require some research, and I confess I did not do it, but it was clearly one of these conversations in the 1950s. And this is therefore a public-facing lecture on Lieberman's part. He's being asked to communicate with the broad public, at least the broad public sensibility, which is assembled. For those of you who know now Lieberman's reputation, this sounds like an ill-conceived juxtaposition of purposes. The scholar that he was. But it's actually a very, very interesting presentation. So just to set you up for it very, very quickly, first of all, I've skipped this part. He's introduced by Alfred Jospy, who was the head of B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation for a good number of years, published a number of popular books of Jewish scholarship, Jewish interest. It's a very, very nice introduction. Notably, Finkelstein was not there on this occasion. This is actually commented upon. I have no idea what it reflects, but it sounds like there's some tension there. But going directly from Jospy says Lieberman will introduce himself because Finkelstein isn't here. So Lieberman begins, and he doesn't introduce himself. He assumes everybody knows who he is, which is probably correct. And he makes this extraordinary presentation, which I'm going to now the first part of it. I'll say a word about the second part when I begin playing it, or before that. He's making an argument here against a broad Jewish sensibility that I confess when I listened to it, I was sort of shocked and disappointed, but also encouraged by it. He's arguing, as you'll hear, that the view that Jewish life has always been about persecution and the like is simply incorrect. And his reference here goes back to late antique Palestine. So he references texts from the Yerushalmi, and you'll hear several of them mentioned. There are some of the examples I've skipped here. They're not included in what you hear, but you'll be able to hear them afterward if you like by going to our online recordings. And he says, actually, in a very interesting way, that Jewish life in Palestine, again, Yerushalmi and some of the Midrashim, was vibrant and productive, and even despite some of the records we have in the sources, meaning in the non-Jewish sources, he shows that if we read the Jewish sources carefully, there's literally no evidence of persecution at the hands of the Romans at all, except for the brief and notable period of the persecutions following Bar Kokhba, the suppression of that war, in other words. So that's what you're about to hear here for section...
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, some of you may wonder what bearing my topic may have on the general problems which the Israeli Institute of the Seminary is discussing. Strictly speaking, it is not my task to explain it, but the task of those who invited me to speak. However, it seems to me that although my subject may seem out of line, it is quite appropriate. Some of the difficulties which our ancestors encountered are essentially perennial issues. Indeed, I am convinced that the period I am going to discuss has much to guide us at the present time. Before proceeding with our talk, I would like to give a more definite delineation of our topic. To portray the life in Palestine in the course of 30 minutes is something like teaching the whole Torah while standing on one leg. We shall therefore try to offer a short glimpse on certain phases of Jewish life in Palestine during the first centuries after the fall of the Second Commonwealth. The 19th century Jewish historians generally treated the life of the Jews in Palestine during that period as the story of the death of the Jews in that land, a history of torture and martyrdom. Modern scholars began to lay special stress on the actual life of the people, both the sages and the masses. However, the monster of religious persecutions always lurked in the background of the description of Jewish life in Palestine. It is true that in the second quarter of the second century of the Christian era, the Palestinian Jews passed a very critical time because of the so-called Hadrianic religious persecutions. The rebellion of Bar Kokhba was drowned in blood and fire. Many Jewish leaders and scholars were executed by the Romans. Many of them went into hiding. But soon after the accession of the Antonini to the Roman throne, the situation changed radically. During the entire period, from the second half of the second century until the end of the fourth century, the Jewish religion was not molested as such. I stress the word as such, for I want to state my position clearly. On principle, the Roman government did not require the Jews to transgress the precepts of their religion. When it wanted to collect taxes and military provisions from the Jews, it disregarded their religious scruples. But there was no deliberate plan on the part of the Roman government to compel the Jews to violate their religion. Or, as the Palestinian Talmud itself puts it, the Romans have no intention to force the Jews to transgress their religion. All they want is to collect the taxes. And hence, the rabbis of the 3rd century instructed the Palestinian Jews to cultivate their fields during the sabbatical year. It is again related in the Palestinian Talmud that in the middle of the 4th century, the rabbis ordered the Jews to bake bread on the Sabbath for the army of Ursicinus. And in explanation of the order, they stated, Ursicinus has no intention to compel us to transgress our religion. All he wants is to eat fresh bread. Nothing can be found in the entire rabbinic literature of the 3rd and 4th centuries from which we might legitimately conclude that the Roman government deliberately persecuted the Jewish religion during that time. Contrary conjectures by some Jewish scholars that the Palestinian Jews of the 3rd century were compelled to transgress the Sabbath, to worship idols, and to give up the rite of circumcision are as remarkable as they are unfounded. Whenever the rabbis speak of tortures during religious persecutions, they state clearly that they refer to the Doro shel Shmat, to the generation of the Hadrianic persecutions. They never mention Jewish religious martyrs as victims of the government of the 3rd and 4th centuries. There is no doubt that Constantine, and especially Constantius, began to curtail certain Jewish rights, but the Jews were not forced to transgress their laws. Moreover, rabbinic literature makes no mention of any limitation of Jewish rights by the first Christian emperors. These decrees had probably very little, if any, practical application in Palestinian localities thickly inhabited by Jews. The emperors were first of all interested in the collection of taxes and had no desire to excite the population. Marcus the Deacon tells us that when Arcadius was asked around the year 400 to order the destruction of the pagan temples in Gaza, he became very angry and said, "I know that this city is full of idols, but it loyally pays its taxes and contributes much to the treasury. If we suddenly frighten them, they will run away, and we shall lose so much in taxes." This report of Arcadius' reply is in line with the general attitude of the emperors in such situations, as correctly demonstrated by the editors of the Vita Porphyri. Jews probably never ceased building synagogues in Palestine during the 4th century. We can see from the description of Epiphanius how difficult it was to erect a church in Tiberias in spite of the explicit authorization of Constantine. In places inhabited either by Jews or by heathens, the religious policy of the Christian emperors of the 4th century remained more theoretical than practical. Even the enforcement of the edicts against paganism of that time depended greatly on the public sentiment in the respective provinces. We must bear one very important fact in mind. Most of our information about Jewish life in Palestine is drawn from literary sources. Among these, the homilies of the rabbis occupy a prominent place. Jewish historians attached too much importance to this genre of literature. They should by no means be neglected, but we should never forget for a moment that we are listening to rhetoricians. They certainly do reflect the general sentiment of the people, but our utilization of them must be controlled by certain definite principles. We accept only that aspect which is derived from dispassionate sources, such as incidental stories related in the halachic parts of rabbinic literature. In illustration, we shall quote a few examples, both from the homiletic and the halachic portions of rabbinic literature. Abot de Rabbi Natan, a source compiled around the beginning of the 3rd century, comments on the verse of Deuteronomy 28. Quote, "Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies that the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things." End of quote. And an anonymous rabbi comments on it, quote, "How in hunger, while a person is eager to eat even barley bread and cannot find it, the nations demand of him white bread and choice meats. How in thirst, while a man desires to drink even a drop of vinegar or a drop of beer and cannot find them, the nations demand of him the finest wines of all lands. How in nakedness, while a man is eager to wear even a garment of coarse wool or linen and cannot find it, the nations demand of him the finest silks imported from all lands. How in want of all things, without light, without knife, without tables." End of quote. This picture reflects admirably the general sentiment of the provincials of that time under the reign of the Severi. The rabbinic source here mentions not the word Jew, but Adam, a man. It is every citizen, and not only the Jew, who is breaking down under the burden of taxes.
Oh, it's already up.
I know them better. I know the difference.
Can I pause this for a second? Is it paused? Okay. So we're going on. There are a number of examples that he brings. After this, I want to draw, just attention. You can hear his critical reading of the source, and in relation to the question of, is this an experience that Jews have alone in their unique experience in Palestine? Or is this a function of living as a subject people, right, in Eastern Province, in the province of Syria, Palestine? And it's clearly the latter. He notices this again and again and again. What we're about to hear is the last part of his presentation, and it begins with what you'll hear is a somewhat comical story of Rabbi Zera after he's immigrated from Babylonia to Palestine. Oh, I'm on the wrong place. Go there. Okay, and what do we do to start it? There it is. Got it. I got it. Thank you.
I know them better. I know the difference between them and these poor below. Again, we read in the Palestinian Talmud that after the famous Rebbe Zeira immigrated to Palestine, he once entered the Jewish butcher shop for the first time to buy a pound of meat. Upon inquiring after the price, he was told 50 small coins and 1 blow. The rabbi announced that he was ready to double the price and forgo the blow, but the butcher insisted on administering the stroke. The poor rabbi finally consented to it. When he came to the academy, he remarked, "What a strange custom you have in your place. A man cannot eat a pound of meat without previously getting a good slap." And he told them the whole story. The rabbis immediately sent after the butcher to punish him. But saintly Reb Zeira swore that he didn't mind the slap at all. He thought it was a local custom. We have no right to infer from it that the butcher wanted to slight a rabbi. He most probably didn't even know who stood before him. He saw a very insignificantly looking man, the rabbi was of a short stature, a green immigrant who talked the Babylonian Aramaic and who didn't know the price of meat. Why not have some fun with him? It only indicates the attitude of a butcher towards a new immigrant, and no more. On the other hand, we have good evidence that the Palestinian bandits had much respect for the famous rabbis. The Palestinian Talmud relates that when a group of Jewish brigands learned that the man whom they had robbed was none other than the famous Rabbi Yochanan, they immediately volunteered to restore half the booty to him, and were finally prevailed upon to restore everything to him. The Babylonian Talmud explicitly states that the brigands of Palestine did not lose their old reverence for the famous Palestinian teachers. And here again, we come across a basic difference between Jewish criminals in Palestine and their fellows in other lands. The predominant term for the malefactor in the Palestinian Talmud is leistes, Hebrew shoded, gazlan, bandit, robber, rather than ganav, thief, which is the common term in the Babylonian Talmud. This difference is well attested by an explicit statement of a Palestinian rabbi. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol ha'ma'amid talmid rasha be'eretz Yisrael, ki'ilu ma'amid listim, u'bechutz la'aretz ma'amid evet. Rabbi Isaac said, he who has the misfortune to teach a wicked pupil in Palestine, he is virtually raising a leistes, a bandit, a brigand. He who has the same misfortune in the diaspora is rearing a slave. The Palestinian malefactor is an over-audacious, impudent brigand. His fellow in the diaspora is a base slave, a denouncer, and a venal villain. The rabbis saw it as their task to combat these terrible vices. The rabbis began to speak of one of the Jewish principles as the highest virtue, and that is shalom, love of peace. It was not a means to an end, but an end in itself. The name of the Lord is peace, and the virtue of peace knows no discrimination of race and creed between Jew and heathen. The Palestinian Talmud records a rule which we translate verbatim. Quote, in a city populated by Jews and Gentiles, you should collect charity from Jews and Gentiles, feed the poor of the Jews and the Gentiles, visit the sick of the Jews and the Gentiles, inter the dead of the Jews and the Gentiles, comfort the mourners of the Jews and the Gentiles, protect the property of the Jews and the Gentiles. These are the ways of peace, end of quote. On the other hand, the rabbis condemned ingratitude and disloyalty as the basest vices. The ingrate, they assert, will eventually land in atheism, forgetting the benefits bestowed upon him by his Maker. The lowest degree of ingratitude is the betrayal of confidence put in you. Ladies and gentlemen, many hundreds of years have passed since the time which we have made the subject of our talk, but we are still confronted with problems similar to those which faced our ancestors in their respective countries. And I trust that our modern educators will succeed in implanting in the young generation the two highest rabbinic virtues so necessary for the stability of our society and the welfare of mankind: love of peace and unlimited loyalty to their respective countries.
So, first of all, those of you who never had the occasion to sit in Professor Lieberman's class now know what a challenge it sometimes was to hear, exactly what it was he was saying. I remember that experience very well as a young student. You can hear his impish sense of humor from time to time. We saw that in some of the pictures, but it really comes through here. His critical reading, we might not agree that it's, for us, a critical reading, right? I mean, his careful reading of the sources, for sure, overly literal. Some of us wouldn't do that. But, times have changed in scholarship. Still, for its period, this is very, very incisive. And what's remarkable, I think, at the end is he knows his audience very, very well. He knows what the message to the audience needs to be, that peace is the first value, and that loyalty to country is the ultimate commitment that one needs to have. It's a beautiful model, I think, for all of us who try to teach in the community, not just students, not just scholars, but to realize that our lessons need to extend far beyond that as well. And he offers a model here, which is admirable.
Our final session today is new approaches to parallels in the Palestinian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud in the digital age. And I invite the chair, Luciana Pajecki-Lederman, director of the Beit Midrash at the Jewish Theological Seminary, to serve as chair. I bring a handout around.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Eva Kisele, who serves now as Golda Ock Visiting Assistant Professor of Rabbinic Literatures and Cultures at JTS. She's currently working on a monograph tentatively titled The Event of Language, Rabbinic Conceptions of Language in Late Antiquity. Eva is going to talk about more than just parallels, inner parallels as sites of conceptual development. She's going to speak for 20 minutes, and then we're going to have 5 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? Can you do it like that? No? See, I'm destroying everything.
It's okay.
It's kind of in my view.
Oh, okay. Well, we can...
Right, we'll figure it out.
Is that better?
Now I can't see me. That's the thing, it's just, yeah. Okay, I'll step aside. Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. In 1931, Saul Lieberman wrote, "It is clear to me that there was an editor of the Yerushalmi who arranged and redacted the sugiyot according to a specific given method. This editor picked entire sugiyot that had been formulated about one subject, linyan echad, and inserted them into all the places where this ruling or question seemed relevant. Lieberman's description has lost almost nothing of its actuality. We're accustomed to viewing inner parallels as the product of redaction, tacitly embracing the same assumptions as did Lieberman. That is, sugiyot grow in one place, around one concern, linyan echad, and reach other inyanim by way of transfer of a semi-final building block. Today, I would like to invite you to step back with me for 20 minutes. Let's try out a different set of spectacles. Let's bracket origin and transfer for a moment, asking instead, what might have motivated the sages in the first place to create the discussion at hand? I brought you 3 examples and 3 tentative rationales. These are solely my heuristics. And I'll say up front, the first one is extremely conventional, the second and third are far more interesting. A parallel between Shabbat and Avodah Zarah integrates key concepts related to healing into single thematic discussion. A parallel between Yerushalmi Tumot and Ketubot probes into tension between intersecting halachot to ask whether a monetary penalty may be imposed on top of lashes. Finally, a parallel between Kiddushin and the Ruvain draws on structural similarity in 2 otherwise unrelated halachot to explore an abstract question. First example, Shabbat and Avodah Zarah. Concerns about healing cut across at least 3 different areas of halakha. Shabbat and holidays require clever workarounds as healing constitutes labor. Patients might seek the advice of healers engaged in alien worship. A distinct concern with ailments of throat and teeth emerges from the laws of agriculture. Why is that? Because vinegar, wine, and oil rubs appear to have been common remedies for ailments of the oral cavity. Like any other foodstuff, these are, of course, subject to the laws of Shvi'it, Tithing, and Truma. Verbal parallels characterize already much of the Tadaitic material. They forge a link between the laws of agriculture and of Shabbat. Tosefta Shvi'it informs us that 7th-year produce may only be used in its usual manner, edibles eaten or drunk, anointments applied. Concrete illustrations of the usual manner follow. החושש בשיניו לא יגמר בהן את החומץ ויהיה פולט, אבל מגמר הוא בלע ומטבל כדרכו ואינו חושש. The same notion also appears in rulings on Shabbat, illustrated here, like there, by ailments of the oral cavity. In the context of Shabbat, these traditions are infused with further elements, a notion of incidental rather than intended healing, and the crucial concept of a critical condition. Evoking the same instruction as Tosefta Shvi'it, Mishnah Shabbat comments, if he was healed, he was healed. Im nitaba, nitaba. The Tosefta phrases the same point in the language of intention. Mishnah Yoma harnesses the tradition about oral ailments to exemplify a critical condition. החושש בפיו מטילים בתוכו סם בשבת מפני שהוא ספק נפשות, וכל ספק נפשות דוחה את השבת. Idolatrous healers still stand as a separate concern in Tannaitic literature. The boundary between permitted and forbidden action here falls along the dividing line between Ripui Mammon and Ripui Nefashot. All comes together as the Yerushalmi integrates these notions into a single unit. This unit reflects further conceptual development. The old concern with ailments of the oral cavity has now evolved into a nascent notion of an internal condition. כלשהו מן השפה ולפנים מרפאים אותו בשבת. And now, רבי זרע corrects, והתנא החושש שיניו לא יאמר בעין חומץ, ולא מן השפה ולפנים הוא, לא אמר כן, אלא אמר רבי זרע בשם רבי בר זפתא, כלשהו מן החלל ולפנים מרפאים אותו. Instead of svek nefashot, we now read of sakana, a new coinage for conditions critical enough to override Shabbat. Follows a list of such conditions, which concludes with sifduna, scurvy, better known as saftina. The discussion swings from concerns about healing on Shabbat to concerns at home in Avodah Zarah, as the Sugya next relates how Rabbi Yochanan, down with sifduna, obtains a cure from a pagan healer. Further anecdotes about problematic or forbidden cures follow. The story about Rabbi Yochanan not only serves as linchpin to connect between two halachic contexts, it doubles to drive home the key takeaways of this integrated discussion: critical conditions, internal conditions, permissible pagan cures. Shma mina tlat, shma mina ha'an siftona sakana, shma mina dechol shehu mina safa ulifnim merapin oto, ושמע מינה, ההודה אמר רבי יעקב בר אחא בשם רבי יוחנן, אם היה רופא אומן, מותר. This inner parallel, the conventional example by all means, appears to reflect an effort to create a single thematic unit, cutting across different areas of halakha. An up-to-date, one-stop sugya, forgive the expression, that equips the learner with key concepts about healing. Rather differently, my next example exhibits a dynamic back and forth between different halachot. In the focus are penalties prescribed for a non-priest eating toma and for a man who seduced or raped a minor-aged girl. Yeah. At first glance, these transgressions seem to have little in common. However, considerable complexity surrounds the respective penalties. Both cases evince a tension between lashes, devised as an earthly substitute for karet, and a fine. Eating tumah is punishable by karet under Leviticus 22. The biblical text makes an extra provision for the inadvertent sinner who must make restitution and pay the added fifth, in other words, a fine. The Mishnah supplies the counterpart for the intentional transgressor. He is exempt from the added fifth. Period. I'll stop here. Penalties for the rape of a minor crucially depend on her identity and status, as her case may fall under different biblical laws, such as, is she betrothed, permitted for marriage with an Israelite? Does she have a father to receive compensation on her behalf? Is she related to the man? And so forth, and so forth. In light of these complexities, the Tanaim compile a list of girls. Though unfit for marriage with an Israelite man, their violator must pay a fine. And, sorry. No. Elu ne'arot sheyesh lehem knas follows the long list. Mamzeret, Gibeonite, Samaritan, a convert, captive, or freed woman who changed status young enough to retain a presumption of virginity. Incestuous relations, a menstruant. Though liable for karet, the culprit does not incur liability by an earthly court. He's fined for this reason, as the Mishnah tells us. Af al pi shehen bi karet, ein bain mitat beit din. Third contribution to the Sugya. Mishnah Makot, chapter 3, lists all those liable for lashes. Problematically, this list includes both the forbidden relations enumerated in Ketubot, in our Mishnah here, and further down, the case of an impure person who ate Tumah, so slightly different, yet similar enough to the Mishnah in Tumot. Here it comes. Eluhen Halokim. Now, what to do with this consolation? Should the offender be sentenced to lashes, fine, or both? The Yerushalmi pursues this question in an extensive inner parallel. It confronts the tension head on. I'm citing the text from Tumot. So, פסקה first, האוכל תרומה מזיד. תמן תנינן, אלו הן הלוקין, והתנינן אלו נערות. האחה התמר לוקה, והאחה התמר משלם. These don't go together. The first step in the sugya is a terutz by Rabbi Yochanan. He seeks to reconcile the lashes of makot with a fine of tubot by reading a prior warning into the conflicting mishnayot. If the culprit acted in spite of being warned, he's liable for lashes. If no such warning had been issued, he pays. L'stadin matnita. So it describes two scenarios. Imitrubo loke, lo itrubo mashalem. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish holds a different opinion. As he views it, even a culprit who was not forewarned is exempt from payment, seeing that he would be liable for lashes had he been warned. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amar, afilu lo yitrubo eino meshalem, machal she'ilo yitrubo haya loke. As the sugya elaborates on either view, we obtain two possible conceptual positions. Rabbi Yochanan treats lashes and fine as alternatives where payment of the fine relieves the culprit from corporeal punishment. He must not be held liable for both, in keeping with the Tanaitic midrash preserved for us in the Sifrei that reads the singular kedei rishato in Deuteronomy 25:2 to imply that a culprit must not be punished twice for a single transgression. This position requires imposing an added criterion on Mishnah Ktubot and Mishnah Makot, such as being warned or not. And the Sugya later bring up a second possibility. So that's a decision to make. Resh Lakish, in turn, takes seriously the unconditional formulation of these Mishnayot. He treats lashes and fine as a kind of pack, where the minor penalty is suspended in light of the looming graver penalty. However, this view would seem to fly in the face of Mishnah Ktubot 3:1, Elu na'arot sheyesh lehem knas. The Sugya tentatively associates his view with Rabbi Meir, on record for holding the culprit liable for both lashes and fine. Step 2. The Sugya reconsiders these positions from a broader fundamental perspective. Can a fine ever come on top of corporeal punishment? While all agree that capital liability excludes an added fine, Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish differ about flogging. במה פליגין? בממון אצל מכות. רבי יוחנן אמר, אין ממון אצל מיתה ויש ממון אצל מכות. ורבי שמעון בן לקיש אמר, כשם שאין ממון אצל מיתה, כך אין ממון אצל מכות. Rabbi Yochanan, who approaches fine and lashes as alternatives administered on a case basis, appears to leave room for instances where both penalties are triggered. Conversely, Reish Lakish, who takes a principled stance against a fine accompanying corporeal punishment, does he not then reason like Rabbi Meir, who adds these penalties unto each other? As previously indicated, Reish Lakish may best be understood as envisioning a combined liability, where the graver penalty suspends the lighter one. The Sugya takes another loop, confronting Reish Lakish with the distinction between Shogeg and Mezid found in Mishnah Trumot, but not in our Mishnayot from Ktubot and Makot. How can Reish Lakish, who adheres to the unconditional formulation of the latter, account for the fact that the Shogeg must pay? Again, the Sugya suggests to interpret his position in line with Rabbi Meir. This brings us to step 3, acknowledgement and resolution. Acknowledgement comes in the form of several cases in which the sages concede to Rabbi Meir a combination of lashes and fine. In all these instances, the offender commits a transgression punishable by lashes, but does so with goods appropriated from his fellow. The resolution, won't read this, sorry. The resolution comes as an insight by Rabbi Mana. With several examples of complex transgressions on the table, Rabbi Mana comes to understand that sequence matters. In keeping with the concessions to Rabbi Meir, we'd have to say that a man raping his minor-aged sister incurs lashes and a fine in one fell swoop. Not so if someone stole his fellow's cow and muzzled it for thrashing. This person is liable for lashes from the moment he puts on the muzzle, but he incurs monetary liability over the stretch of time that follows as he continues to withhold food from the threshing animal. Okay, this is introduced here in the Sugya as Chazar Rabbi Mana ve'amar taman chal, etc., etc. A similar argument can be made if someone decided to eat on Yom Kippur but unknowingly ate Tumah. Rabbi Mana says, "In nifterina b'shnei dvarim necha, in nifterina b'dvar echad machloket Rabbi Yochanan v'Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish." Rabbi Mana realizes that transgressions such as these can be viewed as a sequence of individual acts. The offender can then be held liable for each and every individual act. The conceptual positions advanced by Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, respectively, converge on this view. Thus far, the first part of a long and challenging parallel. Juxtaposing three conflicting Mishnayot, it probed into the tension among them to pursue a conceptual legal question. Hayim yesh mamon etzel makot. No single tractate can properly lay claim to this pursuit. Our Sugya learns by bringing Tumot, Ktubot, and Makot into conversation. The discussion moves between two conceptual positions, represented by Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, respectively. If my reading of Resh Lakish's position is correct, it foreshadows an important principle known from the Bavli, but unattested as such in the Yerushalmi, Kamle b'derava minei. The culprit is held liable only for the graver of two sins. A conceptual breakthrough is achieved as Rabbi Mana realizes that complex transgressions may be broken up conceptually as a sequence of individual acts. How many more minutes do I have? 3? No, we want questions. So 3? Okay, I'll speed through my third example. I'll keep this very brief, or had planned to keep this very brief anyways, as I've published about it in the past, and shamelessly included a link on my handout. The parallel in question appears in tractates Eruvin and Kiddushin on two Mishnayot that do not overlap in substance at all, but share a structural affinity. Just like betrothal, the declaration of an eruf can be conditioned. Such a stipulation can refer to the present, such as you're betrothed to me on condition that I have 100 dinar in my pockets. More commonly, though, the condition will refer to the future. The question then arises, what is the status of the woman so betrothed, of the eruf so declared, until it is known whether the condition has actually been fulfilled? Is the woman bound or not? Is the owner of the eruf free to move? Rabbi Meir, again, is on record in Mishnah Kiddushin for his insistence that all conditions must be doubled for the betrothal to be valid, if not. Now, we do know, this is Mishnah Kiddushin 3:4 in front of you. Now, we know from the Tosefta that his doubled format had been adopted for betrothal already before Rabbi Meir. It's not his argument that convinced the sages to adopt the symphonon. His departure from consensus lies elsewhere. The majority of sages consider a woman not betrothed until the condition is actually fulfilled. She's free to marry another man. Not so Rabbi Meir, who repeatedly proposes to treat her as betrothed until the condition is proved to be not fulfilled. A double stipulation also concerns our second Mishnah. Mishnah Eruvin 3:5 speaks of a person who wishes to escape from Gentile persecution on Shabbat. Unawares whence the Gentiles will arrive, he makes the following declaration. Im ba'u goyim min ha'mizrach, eruvo lema'arav, etc., etc. Im lo ba'u mikan umikan lemakom shel tzeh elech, lo mikan velo mikan, hareini kibnei ha'ir. This is his cop-out. Okay, in the Yerushalmi, this Mishnah opens the inner parallel. Who taught this ruling? With the double stipulation, im ba'u ve'im lo ba'u, Rabbi Meir. Of course, Rabbi Meir. Hi then, Rabbi Meir. Which Rabbi Meir? Not unlike the previous example, the Sugya moves between two conceptual positions. The sages advocate for Rabbi Meir of Kiddushin, Rabbi Yosef for Rabbi Meir of Eruvin. These two personas stand for different ways in which the if can fail. Rabbi Meir of Kiddushin takes his cues from the formula Arayat Mekudeshet Li'almad Nat Sheyardu Gshamim. This declaration leaves the woman in limbo until rain has actually fallen. She is neither betrothed, as no rain has fallen yet, nor is she not betrothed, as the condition is never proven unfulfilled. Rabbi Meir of Eruvin refers to an Eruvin doubt. This is the preceding Mishnah in Eruvin. While the sages opt for leniency, Rabbi Meir holds the owner bound by both domains. In the worst case, pot and home 4,000 cubits apart, he's trapped in the liminal intersection of the two domains, unable to move either forward or backward. So, Rabbi Meir sees and solves the problem. A double stipulation guarantees that the status is well defined at all times. In our sugya, Rabbi Mana realizes that Rabbi Meir is right. Ma Rabbi Mana ve'yeut. Our sugya is not comfortable with this insight. Ready to accept the double stipulation for betrothal in light of the enormous stakes involved, it seems unwilling to make a general concession. The true subject of this discussion is the force of the conjunction al-mnat. Is the second stipulation, if not really necessary, is it not implied by the first on condition that? This inner parallel, then, pursues a highly abstract question, a question so linguistic in its nature we might not expect it in Yerushalmi Sugiyah. It is a question, though, with direct bearing on practical halakha. Not unlike the previous example, this inner parallel explores and learns from the juxtaposition of disjunct material, different halachic contexts, different locations, and the textual order as we know it. The productivity of their encounter can hardly be missed. I look forward to your thoughts and comments, and thank you.
So if anyone has questions, we ask that you stand up, say your name, and say the question out loud. Please.
Jeff Rubenstein from NYU. So thank you. That was really fascinating. So would you associate this kind of move to abstraction or generalization with what we see in the Bavli in the late Amoraim or in the Stamaim, which get even way more abstract, and therefore do we have to kind of revise our notions of the development of these ideas?
That's the big question in the room, of course, and I have to say I have to hold back. I have to hold back not to Bavliize the Yerushalmi. Not to Bavliize the Yerushalmi. I'm increasingly getting an impression that interesting things happen around Rabbi Mana, and of course I'm not the first one to think so. You could call this a redactional activity, but I think redactional is too narrow. It's very conceptual, and in that sense, that gets us much closer, of course, to the late layers of the Bavli. There is perhaps something like a new or grown interest in pursuing conceptual questions. But this is all gut feeling. And I think we will want to see at least 20 such examples before we start building any theories. But yes, I do think this is a question to pursue very earnestly. Thank you.
Marty?
Yeah, Morty Schwartz at JTS. I'm wondering if the genesis of this is like a predictive idea, that by looking at the places where the Yerushalmi lays out the same sugya twice, that it might just happen that those are all conceptual sugyot. So that is the idea. Okay. So I'm curious, I guess the follow-up to that is, like, what about Nizikin? In other words, you didn't put a Nizikin example.
No, on purpose. I have respect for that.
Right, exactly. In other words, in my book, I actually talk about the fact that that process of creating new sugyot happens with Nizikin also, except that in Nizikin they look like Nizikin sugyot, and elsewhere in the place where the Nizikin sugyot has been borrowed, it looks like the rest of the Yerushalmi.
Yes.
So, like, what the hell is going on? And how does that affect the conceptual development?
What I'm trying to find out is if perhaps these parallels actually come into being much earlier than we've previously assumed, so not semi-final building blocks that get, tinkered a little bit with in order to adapt them to the environment, if this is part and parcel of the core job of Palestinian Amoraim. We don't know that, but I think it could account for some of the Nizikim discrepancy. This is actually the reason why I brought this rather boring example from Shabbat and Avodah Zarah, which is like such a cheap textbook parallel with the glue tied around Rabbi Yochanan. It's almost infuriating how cheap it is. But I find it very interesting that we get this parallelization in the Tanaitic sources. That really draws my attention. This is something that might have happened, have begun much earlier. Much caution here, but to me, and this is, I'll tell this to you, this is an idea I have, but I've been thinking a lot recently about the organization of oral knowledge. Having spent the past 5 years in an environment where people thought written or oral, that doesn't make any difference. And all of a sudden I found myself in a traditionalist position wanting to argue, hey, no, that can't be true. And with all due reverence for medieval English and Romance literature, no. It does feel different in rabbinic literature. And I think one reason for that is really that this is a scholarly literature that wants to convey language and knowledge. And so if you think about that, what might one difference be? In a written text, you can have references to other places. No such thing exists in oral literature. Orders and tractates showing, do they really mean anything in an oral literature? I don't think so. Not very much. And so if you want to make a reference in a recited text, you would have to integrate your cross-reference into the flow of the recitation. How do we do that? I think citations and parallels are wonderful ways of doing that. But this is only my speculation, so I'm thinking that this could help us in the end to, let's say, get a better understanding of the parallels. But as said, 20 more examples, 200 more examples, and then we can talk.
Thank you.
It's an exciting project.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Professor Menachem Katz, who is professor at the Open University and recently published digital editions of the Yerushalmi, Masechet Yevamot and Gittin. He's the author of Jerusalem Talmud Tractate Kiddushim, a critical edition and a short explanation, and editor of the Saul Lieberman's HaYerushalmi Kipshuto. And Professor Menachem Katz is going to talk about the digital edition of the Yerushalmi, past, present, and future.
Thank you. I wish to extend my gratitude to JTS and to the partners in organizing this conference, Professor Yonatan Milgrom and Professor Aviada Cohen. Similar to other Talmudic and Midrashic rabbinic texts, there is a need for a critical edition of the Talmuds. Both Talmuds survived in a condition requiring restoration. Like a building or synagogue. This is in Slovakia, in Bardiev, before the restoration. This is after the restoration. It's a small town in east of Slovakia where I was born. A critical edition is the desired product of the restoration effort. There are great differences in goals and challenges regarding the editing of a scholarly edition of each Talmud. Metaphorically, the two Talmuds are the likes of two ancient palaces treated differently as they aged. The characteristic efforts differ between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. In the Babylonian Talmud, most textual variations are not errors, but reworkings. In contrast, The text of Yerushalmi is filled with errors, with relatively few reworkings. What caused it? Why it is? One palace, the Babli, was continually interpreted over the years, and each generation preserved it, but at the same time adapt it to its needs and understanding. Those are challenges regarding to the Babli is to access a work created during the Talmudic period rather than a different work from end of the 19th century, I mean Vilna Press. Vilna Press is a product of not of Talmudic age, it is from 19th century. In other palaces, the Yerushalmi stood abound for most of the generation, and defects were created due to the neglect. Thus, the main challenge is to amend this. This is after the restoration. First, tools, scholarship and research methods of recent decades, especially digital tools, make the restoration task feasible, more easy. The first attempt to reconstruct the entire Yerushalmi Tractate using up-to-date tools is my edition of Tractate Kiddushin. During the preparation of the Yerushalmi Kiddushin Critical Edition, it became clear to me that important aspects of the edition can be best done within the framework of a flexible, I emphasize, a flexible digital edition. The edition will provide its users with the Yerushalmi text, including various elements which the user can remove and return at will, unlike a print edition fixed to a single format. One can choose whether to view an adapt text as restored by us and untouched transcription of the manuscript or a photography of the manuscript, if it's manuscript of Leiden or Gniza manuscripts. Normally, the text is divided into halachot, but the division of the paragraph itself is an interpretation. Therefore, the user is offered a display of entire chapter as an alternative. We made a synopsis available to each line at the click of a button instead of a separate appendix as required by a print edition. The edition also combines advantages of a personal book form. Each user can add personal notes along his study, like closing at the marking of a physical book. Users can also suggest public notes, and the public notes everybody will see. In my options, the digital edition is a paradigm shift. Regarding to the Bavli, a different model of a flexible digital edition seems to be best. In accordance with research needs its findings, we propose a flexible edition that presents both the fundamental layers of the two textual branches and the later layers. As the text of the Babylon Talmud does not remain fixed, its critical edition should not present a frozen and partial picture of a single moment in its history, and rather offer an access of its layers. Digital media is suitable for this task and perhaps technically necessary for creating such edition. I would like to say in few words about two areas in which the digital edition enables progress in research in future. First, the literary aspect, and the second, the cultural and social aspect, especially about the Greek influence in the rabbinic of the Palestine. Just a minute. Okay. Oh, not this. Oh, yes. One possessing of cultural literature sensible will, without question, perceives the Talmud as a work of considerable literary merit. In this regard, however, the Talmud remains largely unexplored. Hopefully, over the time, this neglect will be reminded. And this is my goal, one of my goals, not just the classical goals of the critical edition, but also to show how the Talmud, Palestinian Talmud is a literary work. And I quoted Lieberman. Rabbinic literature is not only academic and theoretical. Its future is also artistic literary aspect. So not a literary work in the classic sense of the word, it lends itself to literary analysis. In recent decades, important studies have been conducted on the literary aspect of a Babylonian Talmud. A fundamental problem affecting this type of research is the question of the formation of the Talmud, especially around its Stamayic content and its relation to original Amoraic teaching. Indeed, many conversations arose on these questions. The desire to trace the literary aspect of the Amoraic work is one of the several intentions of studying the literary aspect of the Jerusalem Talmud. According to Professor Zussman, without Yerushalmi, very often it is very difficult to find the Archimedes point of the original teaching of the Amoraim in the Tanjung of Babylonian Talmud. In other words, through the study of the Yerushalmi, it is possible to access Amoraic work that has not undergone intensive processing. Those literary features of the Amoraic teaching in their time are far more accessible in the Yerushalmi. According to Zussman description, the Babylonian Talmud, it is Zussman, it's not just other researchers. According to Zussman description, the Babylonian Talmud developed into current from approximately 470 years, divided into three periods. The first Amoraic period, approximately 140 years, starting from the year 219. The second Amoraic period, after Abai Verava, approximately 140 years. And the third period, the post-Amoraic period, approximately 190 years. In contrast, in the Jerusalem Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud developed around the year 220 to approximately 370, spending only about 150 years. In other words, the Babylonian Talmud consists of the three main layers. The extent to which to this screen remain an open question to scholars to what is the first and what is the second and what is the third stage. The development of the Jerusalem Talmud is in contrast occurred over a significantly shorter period and thus offer an advantage for studying a literary aspect of Amoraic work. In the shorter time frame results in the freer layers of editing and redaction. Consensus, the Jerusalem Talmud provides a clearer window to the original literary structure and characteristic of the original Amoraic materials. Okay. I will shortly speak a few words about an example, a case study of this. The Mishnah, okay, I will do this shortly, but the Mishnah says there are four groups. יש in the יבמות, יש מותרות לבעליהם ואסורות ליבמיהם, מותרות ליבמיהם ואסורות לבעליהם, מותרות לאלו ולאלו ואסורות לאלו ולאלו, ואלו מותרות לבעליהם ואסורות ליבמיהם. And just the Mishnah is also giving the not just the rule, but also what they are. Kohen, Hediot, Kiddush, and in every group, the Mishnah gives for, not example, for examples. But it seems that there are just that. And the Yerushalmi, we not, in the Yerushalmi, he says, ask us, why it is just this four? And he asked, Ve'ilin it lichornin. There are also others. And he brings in each group three more examples. And the conclusion is, Hada Messiah le Rabbi Yonah. Just a minute, I think that. Yes. No. Hata מסייע לרבי יונה, דרבי יונה אמר, let כללוי דרבי כללין. This supports Rabbi Yona, since Rabbi Yona says the grouping or the rules of Rebbe, of the Mishnah, are not exact. And but the Yerushalmi says not just one times. It says on every group. You can see it. Also here, ve'ilin inun ha'it lechorin, in every group he brings three examples, and also in the third time. And the same phrase, Hada Mesel Rabbi Yona, the Amar let klale de Rabbi Yona klalim. That you see that Yerushalmi, he don't just ask the question, but also he wants to show us in literary structure how the question is important. And if you, I don't sure that it's right, but in the Mishnah it's 4 examples. In the Yerushalmi, every group is of 3, the together in 7, the number which is very, very used in Jewish studies in other Bavli, just a minute, it says the No, it is. Oh, the Bible says simply, Tana v'shier, el alav shma mineh, Tana v'shier shma mineh. The same result is also in the Bible. But in Bible, it's simple. It's not a literary structure. In Yerushalmi, it's like rhythmus. It's like rhythmus. 1 second, three times, like in the poem. Like in the poem. It's nice, and it's much more rhetorical. Much more rhetorical. And the other field, which I want to just a few words about this. Cultural and social aspect, case study of Greek influence. The influence of Greek language and culture among the Jews of the land of Israel is known, and with an ever greater variation concerning Greek culture. The sages who lived in the cities with Greek character, polis, were well versed in the Greek culture, as described by Lieberman. Rabavau, head of rabbinic school in Caesarea, is the best example. I will do it shortly. What I want to say in shortly is that we didn't still did not research which rabbis had more influence, not just in the Greek language and culture, but also in law, like Rabavau, when others that were less or nothing. But who were the examples that less, that the teacher of Rabavau, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, we don't see, it is not like Rabavau. Rabavau is Kesarin, Rabbi Yochanan, Tveria. But they were, they work together. They work together. And it's not in many times we see that we have rabbis. There are one like Rabavau and other like Rabbi Yochanan or others. But many times it is rare they are working together. And in Yerushalmi we see that they are working together, especially when it is a question about Roman rules. And to opposite of it, I mentioned just Chazon Ish and his cousin, Lieberman. It wasn't, they were family, but not studied together. And in Talmud Yerushalmi, we see that they work together, and I think that a digital edition will help us to do the best research about this field. I will now finish. Just a minute. Okay, I spoke just a few words about this presentation. It's only touched a fraction of the potential of the digital Talmud. While the site is now accessible to the public, much work remains ahead. Bezrat Hashem. Oh, here it is. No, here it is. This is a Gniza fragment of Talmud Yerushalmi. Bezrat Hashem El Olam Naaseh V'Natzliach. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think we have time for one question.
Sasha Stern from UCL. So, common wisdom has it that the Yerushalmi is compact and the Bavli is expansive. In fact, I think that's one of the key criteria that Wussmann used in his answer called Beshuv. He compared Yerushalmi as a king, and then the rest of Yerushalmi and the Bavli, and the larger, more and more expensive. But really interesting that the example you brought shows exactly the opposite. That the Yerushalmi was expensive and the Bavli was concise.
It is not just one example. I also in the thesis brought a few examples, and it's interesting thing that if you see the Amoraic sugya, there are many times that the Yerushalmi is larger, and the Bavli is part of the editing is smaller. But after that, you have a second and the third period that if you compare the period of the Yerushalmi in the Bavli, in the Sugya Amoraic Bavli, you see a few times, not every time, that the Yerushalmi is much more larger, and what I wanted to show, it's not just larger, it's more literary art. And Yerushalmi in the Bavli, there is a work of editing, and one of the aspects of editing that it is smaller. It is smaller. You are right. You are right.
Thank you.
Thank you. תודה רבה.
Thank you very much. תודה מנחם.
יופי, תודה.
We are almost finished. I'm honored to have Chancellor Shuli Rubin Schwartz greet us, after which I'll have some very, very brief closing remarks, and then we'll be done. Thank you, Chancellor Schwartz.
Thank you. Wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces here, and I'm here most especially to thank Professor Milgram for making this happen. For organizing this symposium, for ensuring that it was in fact worthy of the legacy that it inherits by being a symposium here at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Dr. Milgram, I remember as an undergraduate in Liss College, in our undergraduate program with Columbia University, he got not only the grounding to be able to do more sophisticated Talmud study, but the bug to devote his life to it. I remember when you came in, you didn't exactly say, this is my goal, and yet by the time you finished, it was clear that that is the path that you would take, and then to go and study with Shama Friedman, really to join that line of scholarship that goes back to Lieberman and Ginsburg, and then now to be on the faculty here, continuing that line through your own scholarship, through the ways in which you interrogate the text, add your own voice to the text, and critique it as well. That is very much in the finest tradition of what we do here at JTS. And he's too modest, so that's my opportunity to do this, and I know you all join me in thanking him for making this possible, so thank you so much. And for all of you, you all together now, I only wish I could have come here at the beginning and stayed and heard your talks, but I am confident that what you have done today in coming together is to push those boundaries still further, extend those boundaries of study. And, this is something, again, that JTS has done for so long. It was even in the forefront of the digitization of the manuscripts dating back to the 80s with the aptly known Lieberman Institute in Israel. And I know that that was probably something you did as a graduate student, as was working with that institute. So I'm just thrilled that you were able to bring together scholars here to the place where these kinds of studies of the Yerushalmi have played an important role since the time of Solomon Schechter, who helped us understand the importance of the Geniza that he had found, and then began in his own publications bringing this to light for a broader audience. I have been at JTS for a long time, but I did not have the privilege of studying with Professor Lieberman. Coming here to study history, I doubt I ever had the skills to sit in a class with him, to my regret. I did not know Professor Ginsburg either, although my family ties to the Ginsburg family are very strong. My father, who was a JTS rabbi, studied with Louis Ginsburg. I actually have the first volume of the Legends of the Jews autographed to my dad, which is still part of my library. And our families were very close. So his grandsons, whom I hope David was here earlier, and I know that they remain close and continue to support the digitization project here at JTS. They kind of grew up on Shabbos afternoon in my grandparents' home in Brookline, Massachusetts, and during my own student years, my late husband and I used to grew very close to Professor Ginsburg's widow, who lived right behind JTS in Morningside Gardens, helped us get an apartment there because she was a formidable woman and you did not mess with her. And when she told the co-op board to give us an apartment, they did. And we were blessed. You know, we walked her to shul, which was in this room at the time. And I'm embarrassed to say that though I was a lowly undergraduate, and seating in this space was very hierarchical, and the women's side matched the men's side, so she sat in the third row here, whereas by my status, I would have been hugging the back wall where the fire extinguisher was. And instead, she was like, nope, you're coming up to sit with me, walk me, you're sitting up here. So I have to say, I sat in the row in front of Sylvia Heschel. It was very embarrassing, very embarrassing. But the advantage is that walking her to shul, when she had to sit and stop at a bench and rest, we heard so many wonderful stories about JTS during the many decades preceding my own arrival to JTS. And so this was a place not only of serious learning, but of deep commitment and love, not only for the texts and not only for the tradition, but for the community that it fostered. And thank God that we continue to foster now with our wonderful faculty and our terrific student body. So I just really want to end by saying that we hope there'll be more of this, a symposium that, as we always do, honors the past, celebrates our legacy in the present, and provides us a hopeful path forward to future such endeavors, future scholarship in this area, and a continued love of the texts that bind us to one another. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chancellor Schwartz, for your remarks and reminiscences. It's not often you get to hear part of your eulogy. I appreciate that also. So our symposium has come to an end, and again, I would like to thank our co-sponsors, Professor Aviata Cohen, Professor Menachem Katz. The message of our gathering, as Shuli said, is clear. Like every generation of Jewish scholars before us, we here at the seminary honor our teachers and build on their accomplishments. This is achieved by delving more deeply into their writings, demonstrating when new data and methods can achieve more precise conclusions, and finally, by bringing the richness of the ancient texts to the public via the latest technologies. I thank all of you for coming. I thank the presenters, and I bid you good night.